The snow fell upon the ramparts of the wall in a restless, ceaseless drift carried by the cutting wind that howled through the night. Ghostly flurries danced in torchlight, their patterns fragmented against jagged stone and thick ice. Far below, the courtyard of Castle Black lay hushed, a barren place where footprints faded as soon as they were made. Beneath a cloud-laden sky, torches struggled to maintain their feeble glow as if afraid that this night might be their last. The cold was bitter and the wind showed no mercy. Men huddled behind cloaks and furs, longing for the warmth of the feast hall or their own cramped barracks. Some whispered that the wall itself seemed to groan, a low, resonant sound like something half awake beneath the ice. Yet above all these murmurs of mortal men, a single presence stalked the shadows in silent purpose. Melisandre of High, her red robes shifting about her like living flame, glided through the drift. She moved as though the cold were but a mild inconvenience, her eyes glowed with an inner fire that not even the relentless northern wind could extinguish. She reached the place where Jon Snow had been slain. The ground was still stained with a memory of his blood, the snow melted and refrozen, glinting like rubies in the torchlight. Though Jon had already been restored, brought back by the Lord of Light's mercy or perhaps by Melisandre's unwavering faith, the echoes of his death lingered in the spot. It was here that her illusions had been shattered, where her vision of victory in the flames had wavered. Yet the Red Priestess believed that fate could be bent. The Lord of Light had returned Jon Snow to the living for a reason. There was another destiny to fulfill. However, a part of her heart still ached at the memory of another Targaryen, one she had glimpsed in flames and in prophecy. A silver-haired prince with a deep sense of honor and the weight of prophecy etched into his every breath. Rhaegar Targaryen, lost to time, dead on the Trident. But was death truly an end? She knelt upon the frozen ground, letting her cloak pool around her. The torches sputtered and a swirl of smoke curled upward. Melisandre rested her hands atop the icy earth. She closed her eyes and whispered ancient words in a guttural tongue. The air stirred with unseen power, like currents rippling beneath still water. She opened her eyes to see a flicker in the darkness, an ember that might catch the wind if stoked with the right incantation. This was not her first time attempting such a thing. She had looked in her flames, even in the far-off days before leaving Dragonstone, and had glimpsed a shape that haunted her. Not just the promise of Azor Ahai reborn, but a tragic figure, a prince consumed by war and crowned by prophecy. The words of Valyrian and the old rhymes of Ashai tumbled from her lips in a quiet chant. Her voice rose and fell, weaving itself through the silence like threads of molten gold. She felt the warmth of Lawlor flicker deep within her chest. It spread outward, though the frigid northern wind tore at her robes. Sweat gathered at her temples. She felt a stirring in the darkness. A faint pulse, an echo. Could she draw it forth again? Was it even possible to bring a soul so long departed back from whatever realm it had gone to? Her chanting grew louder. Sparks of energy crackled along the ground. The torches flared high, lighting the courtyard in a sudden blaze. Some of the watchmen near the gate turned to look, startled by the fiery shimmer. They muttered under their breaths, but none dared approach Melisandre. She was in the grip of something beyond them, something they could not name or hope to understand. She sensed him, a heartbeat that did not belong in this world, faint as a memory. There was a tension, as though the fabric of reality itself were being pulled taut, ready to snap. In the corner of her eye she saw movement. Snow swirling in unnatural patterns, forging the outline of a man. Her chant reached a crescendo and the breath caught in her lungs. The courtyard erupted in brilliant light, forcing the Night's Watch onlookers to shield their eyes. For a moment, Tom seemed to shudder. When the light faded, a shape remained. He was kneeling, hair of silver and gold dripping with ectoplasmic memory, as if he had been pulled from the watery depth of a dream. Rhaegar Targaryen's face was gaunt, shaped by suffering, yet in the sharp lines of his jaw and the unwavering pride of his bearing, he retained an otherworldly beauty. His armor was ghostly, fragments of shattered rubies glimmering at his breast. His eyes fluttered open, amethyst orbs that took in the night with uncertainty and awe. Melisandre sank forward, breathing heavily. She pressed her hands to the freezing ground, feeling her strength wane. This was a more difficult resurrection than she had ever attempted, a soul long separated from its mortal coil. The Red Woman dared to lift her gaze and behold the figure before her. He was alive, and yet not. Rhaegar's chest rose and fell with unsteady breaths. A wisp of steam escaped his parted lips. Confusion and wonder warred upon his face. She forced herself to stand, ignoring the lightheadedness that swirled behind her eyes. She had done it. By the grace of the Lord of Light, Rhaegar Targaryen breathed once more. Somewhere, in the gloom of distant ramparts, a horn was blown. Even the wind seemed to hush. Melisandre approached carefully, half doubting the reality of her success. But doubt would have to wait. She felt the power still thrumming in the air like the dying chords of a great harp. "Prince Rhaegar," Melisandre said, her voice trembling. "You have been summoned back to the realm of the living, for a cause that is greater than us all." He blinked, struggling to focus. His voice, when it came, sounded distant as though echoing from a long tunnel. "Who calls me?" The words stumbled out, and pain seemed to twist his features. "Where am I?" She laid a hand against his shoulder, a gesture as gentle as she could manage. "You are at the wall in the north beyond your time. I am Melisandre of Ashai, servant of the Lord of Light. He has brought you back through me, that you may fulfill what was left undone." His brows knitted in confusion. "The trident," he murmured. "The water was red with blood. Where is Elia? Where is my son?" In that moment, Melisandre felt the weight of tragedy in his voice. She steadied herself, meeting his anguished eyes. "They are gone, my prince. That life ended long ago. You have been granted a second chance for a reason. Darkness gathers. An ancient enemy returns from beyond the wall. The Night's King and his hordes of the dead threaten every living soul." Rhaegar's hand clenched at the spectral rubies on his breastplate. Confusion radiated from him. He tried to stand, but his legs wobbled. Melisandre tightened her grip on his arm, helping him. She felt heat pouring from him, as if he burned from within, a sign of the Lord of Light's power coursing through his newly resurrected form. "Why would your God want me?" he whispered. "My life ended in defeat. I led men to slaughter. I failed everyone who believed in me." Melisandre's throat constricted, but she kept her voice steady. "The prophecy is not yet written in full. You thought to be the prince that was promised, but the true path may yet lie ahead of you. The Lord of Light is not finished with you, Rhaegar Targaryen. There is a war to come that dwarfs mortal squabbles over thrones and crowns. You must aid the one who stands against the darkness." Rhaegar opened his mouth to speak, but a wave of exhaustion passed through him. He sagged, and Melisandre gestured for two of the Night's Watch guards, who still hovered by the courtyard's edge, wide-eyed with disbelief, to assist her. They rushed forward, setting aside their misgivings about this strange, resurrected man. Gently, they helped Rhaegar stand, guiding him through the snow and toward one of the side halls, where a meager brazier might offer a bit of warmth. Word spread quickly among the brothers of the Night's Watch that something miraculous had taken place in the courtyard. Men peered through doorways, muttering in hushed voices. Jon Snow was found near the top of the wall, overseeing repairs, and brought down at once. He strode in with confusion carved into his features, flanked by Ser Davos and Tormund Giantsbane, the wind still ruffling his dark curls. Jon's gaze fell upon the figure seated by the brazier. At first, he saw only the silver hair, the Targaryen cast of face, and the near unbelievable notion that this man might be one of Daenerys's kin. But then Jon registered the expression etched into the man's features, the regal poise, the haunted sorrow in his eyes. This was not some leftover Sellsword from Essos. This was someone else entirely. Melisandre stood in a corner, looking drained but triumphant. She inclined her head at Jon's approach. "I have performed a great task," she said softly, a tremor in her voice that Jon recognized from the time he himself had been reborn. "He is Rhaegar Targaryen." Jon nearly stumbled. The very name was legendary, both revered and despised, depending on who spoke it. Rhaegar Targaryen, the prince whose actions had toppled a kingdom, whose abduction of Lyanna Stark had ignited a war that cost House Stark their father, brother, and countless bannermen. Even Ned Stark's friend, Robert Baratheon, had spoken of Rhaegar with abiding hatred. Jon's throat tightened. The father of, or so rumor said. So the bard's songs told. Could it be that the father of the boy who would have been a rightful heir was alive again? As if sensing Jon's tumult of emotion, Rhaegar lifted his gaze. "You have the look of the north about you," he murmured. "And yet there is something else." He exhaled shakily. "Your eyes. They remind me of my sister." Jon took a half step forward. The brazier's fire outlined the solemn lines of his face. "I am Jon Snow, Lord Commander of the Night's Watch," was Lord Commander. His voice was soft, laden with the tension of all that had changed since his death. "They call me king in the north now. My mother was," he froze, uncertain how much to say, for even now, the truth about his parentage was a precarious secret. Sam's discoveries, Bran's visions all pointed to a deeper identity. And here sat Rhaegar Targaryen, the father he had never known he had until recently. The man was as much a myth as the White Walkers once were. "I was raised as Ned Stark's son," Jon finished, voice tight with the weight of half-truths. Something flickered in Rhaegar's eyes as though he caught a glimmer of recognition. He opened his mouth, but no words formed. Instead, he looked at Melisandre. "Why?" he asked, voice rough with renewed emotion. "Why bring me back if I have already doomed so many?" Jon's expression hardened. "No matter what you did in the past, the real threat now is the army of the dead. If the Lord of Light gave you a second chance, perhaps it is because we need every possible sword. Even one long-believed lost." Rhaegar absorbed this. The flickering flame cast dancing shadows across his face. He was silent for what felt like an age. Then he nodded, just once. "I will fight," he said. "I pledged my life once before to protect my family and my people. I failed. If the gods have seen fit to give me another chance, I will not let that chance be wasted." Despite himself, Jon felt a strange swirl of emotion, anger, curiosity, pity, and a tenuous thread of kinship, though he dared not speak it aloud yet. "We'll get you something warmer than that spectral armor," Jon said, eyes lingering on the shimmering rubies embedded in the ghostly metal. He glanced at one of the guards. "Find him some leathers, a cloak. We can't have a Targaryen freezing to death his first night at the wall." A faint, weary smile tugged at Rhaegar's lips. "I've never been this far north. Even the cold seems sharper." He inhaled, his breath visible in the air. His chest rose and fell as if he could not quite believe the simple act of breathing anew. Thus began the uneasy alliance that would reshape the final chapter of the War for the Dawn. Melisandre watched them, a quiet satisfaction lighting her red eyes. She knew that the true test was yet to come, the forging of old grudges and new alliances in the face of the Night King's approach. If Rhaegar Targaryen and Jon Snow could unite and stand as a bulwark against the dead, then perhaps the Lord of Light's prophecy might yet come to fruition. In the coming days, the wall stood battered by storms. Word reached Castle Black that the Night King's forces had encroached upon Eastwatch by the sea. The frozen sea groaned, offering yet another path around the world of men. Ravens were sent to Winterfell, to Dragonstone, and to any lord or lady who might heed the desperate call. Food became precious, morale grew strained, and suspicion lingered around every corner. For if Jon Snow's resurrection had been miracle enough, what did it mean that Rhaegar Targaryen, dead for nearly 2 decades, was among them, his silver hair stark against black leathers, his haunted gaze full of sorrows that defied time? Rhaegar kept mostly to himself at first, walking the ramparts as if in search of answers. When he tried to recall the final moments of his mortal life, images of the trident swam before him, Robert Baratheon's fury, the crash of warhammers on armor, the swirl of water around his legs, rubies scattering like spilled wine across the river. Those memories seared him with regret. Questions dogged him like ghosts in the night. Where was Lyanna? Where was their child? He remembered so little, only the impetus that had driven him to risk it all for what he believed was destiny. At times, he encountered men who recognized the Targaryen name with hatred or suspicion. They whispered behind his back, murderer, rapist, fool. The songs told different stories, some lauding him as a tragic hero, others condemning him. Yet the real man was more complicated than any song. He heard their mutters and bared his teeth in silent pain. He could not erase the tragedies he had set in motion. But neither could he unlearn the lessons that loss had etched into him. Eventually, Jon Snow approached him in the shadow of the wall, the massive ice glimmering in the pale daylight. Jon had ghost at his side, that great white dire wolf padding across the frosty ground. Rhaegar turned at the sound of footsteps crunching snow. The dire wolf sniffed at the air, ears pricked, curious but not hostile. "Prince Rhaegar," Jon said quietly, halting a few steps away. He wore a thick fur cloak, black gloves, and the weary expression of a man who carried more burdens than any single soul should. Rhaegar inclined his head. "Just Rhaegar," he said. "I lost my crown at the Trident." Jon studied him, unsure whether to press the matter of titles. "We found a sword for you in the armory," he said at length. "Nothing fancy, but it's Valyrian steel. Maybe we can hone your skills before the battle, if you feel strong enough." A trace of concern underpinned his words. He knew well how fragile a resurrected body could be. Rhaegar's hand curled at his side, recalling the old rhythms of swordsmanship. "I was always more comfortable with a harp than a sword," he said softly, "yet I fought nonetheless." He looked at Jon. "Valyrian steel? That means we are preparing for it." "White Walkers," Jon confirmed, voice grim. "Ordinary steel is useless against them. Fire can help, dragonglass is good, but Valyrian steel, if you can get it, works best. We have precious few swords." but a Targaryen prince should bear something worthy of his lineage. There was no mockery in Jon's tone, just a somber recognition that they needed every blade. Rhaegar lowered his gaze. "I will do what must be done," he said, a quiet resolve in his voice. Then he glanced at Jon's face. I wish to know more of these events. The world I knew is gone. My father's madness, my own sins, the war, the aftermath, how did it all end? Who sits on the Iron Throne? Is it my sister, Daenerys?" Jon weighed his words. The truth was complicated. Cersei Lannister currently rules in King's Landing, though Daenerys Targaryen has landed in Westeros to claim the throne she believes is hers by birthright. "She is your sister, yes?" Jon paused, uncertain how to proceed. "She has 3 dragons." Rhaegar's eyes flickered with sudden intensity. "Dragons? Alive?" "So it's said. I've seen them myself." A whirlwind of emotions crossed Rhaegar's face, astonishment, pride, sorrow. Dragons had been dead for so long, and yet now, at the cusp of the world's greatest threat, they lived again. Would they be enough to turn the tide? Jon hesitated, his throat tightening. Part of him, a very large part, wanted to blurt out the truth. "Father." But was Rhaegar truly his father? Ned Stark had hidden everything so carefully, forging a lie to protect Jon from Robert Baratheon's wrath. And Melisandre's resurrection of Rhaegar changed everything. The truth had once seemed an abstract concept, something that might matter only for alliances. But now the flesh-and-blood man was here, with questions swirling in his violet eyes. Jon felt torn between the vow he had made to keep the secret and the moral imperative to reveal it. Rhaegar deserved to know the fate of Lyanna's child. More than that, the realm might need to know if it meant uniting houses for the final stand. He said nothing for the moment, only gave a curt nod. "We will talk more, but we have duties to see to. The men will train later. I'd like you to join us." Then he turned and walked away, Ghost at his heel, leaving Rhaegar to the echoing silence of the Great Wall. That night, in a small chamber lit by a single candle, Jon confided in Davos Seaworth. The old smuggler-turned-knight listened patiently, arms folded across his chest. The swirling gloom outside pressed against the narrow window slits, and the candle cast long shadows on the stone walls. "Ser Davos," Jon began quietly, pacing the cramped room. "Melisandre has done something unimaginable. She brought back Rhaegar Targaryen, father of..." He paused, heart-pounding. "My father. If all the signs are right and what Bran saw was true, Rhaegar is my father and Lyanna Stark my mother. I am not a Snow, but a Targaryen. My entire life I believed myself a bastard. And now here I stand, king in the north, while the rightful father I never knew is resurrected." Davos stroked his beard, eyes sympathetic. "A fine mess, eh? But if it's the truth, then it might matter a great deal. The lords of the north follow you because they believe you're Ned Stark's son. Does telling them otherwise gain us anything? Do we want to sow confusion, especially now?" Jon exhaled, shoulders sagging. "I don't know. This war against the dead, everything else is secondary. But I can't keep this from him forever. He deserves to know." Davos eyed him. "He's a man out of time, Jon. He'll have to grapple with the changes in the realm first. Telling him now might break him. But I won't pretend to know the right choice here. All I know is we must keep our eyes on the main threat." Jon nodded reluctantly. The weight in his chest grew heavier. "He's not what I expected," Jon confessed after a moment. "The songs make him out to be either a gallant knight or a vile kidnapper. But when I look at him, I just see a broken man who wants to atone for his mistakes. He's quiet, respectful, even gentle in some ways." Davos snorted softly. "Life and death tend to humble a man. And if he's truly your father, well, that's a conversation that'll need to happen. But for now, maybe let him focus on the fight too." "Come." Jon agreed, though he could not silence the part of himself that yearned for answers. Had Rhaegar loved Lyanna? Was Jon truly the result of love rather than violence? How would the knowledge of his existence reshape this man who had lost everything? Even as these questions gnawed at Jon, Rhaegar found himself drawn to the training yard where the clang of steel on steel rose into the air. The Night's Watch and wildlings alike practiced with swords, spears, and axes. The biting cold reddened their cheeks, but they pressed on, determined to prepare for the horrors that marched ever closer. Tormund Giantsbane, that hulking red-bearded wildling, gave Rhaegar a keen once-over. "So you're the fancy dragon prince," he remarked with a snort. "Heard stories about you, all about songs and rubies. You any good with that sword? Or do you just strum the harp and whisper to the ladies?" A flicker of amusement touched Rhaegar's eyes. "Maybe both," he said, with a polite dip of his head. He gripped the practiced sword they'd given him, common steel for the yard, and circled Tormund warily. They sparred, the wildling's brute strength against Rhaegar's fluid technique. Rhaegar was rusty, but the memory of swordsmanship returned to him with each clash. Tormund laughed uproariously when Rhaegar stumbled, then scowled when the prince landed a deft strike that nearly knocked the axe from Tormund's grip. They were evenly matched, if only because Tormund had a savage unpredictability that Rhaegar struggled to counter. At the edge of the yard, Jon Snow observed with critical eyes, arms folded over his chest, nodding occasionally at some footwork or parry. Rhaegar's skill, though tempered by years in the grave, was undeniable. He fought with precision, a deliberate grace that recalled a time when he had been heir to the throne, trained by the best knights of the realm. After a series of intense exchanges, Tormund threw up his hands, panting steam into the chill air. "Ha! You've some fight in you yet, Dragon Prince. Not bad for a man plucked from the grave." Rhaegar tried to slow his own ragged breathing. "I never wanted war," he said quietly, "but I learned how to fight in one." Tormund's grin softened a fraction. "Well, you'll get your chance to fight in another soon enough." He looked around at the watchers. "Next," he bellowed, stepping aside to let another man take up position against Rhaegar. This time, Jon took the field, drawing his own practice blade with a measured calm. The men around them fell silent, aware of the significance, even if they did not fully grasp the truth behind these two. Some whispered that Jon might have Targaryen blood. Others dismissed it as rumor. But to see Jon and Rhaegar face each other with swords in hand held a strange fascination. They exchanged a simple salute, each man's face solemn. Jon struck first, a low slash, testing. Rhaegar parried, stepping aside neatly. Jon pressed forward, feinting a thrust before pivoting into a backhand slash. Rhaegar's eyes narrowed and steel met steel. The ring of metal resonated across the yard. They moved with an almost eerie synchronicity at times, like mirror images. Jon's style bore echoes of his training under the likes of Roderick Castle and his experiences beyond the wall, while Rhaegar's classical technique, honed at the Red Keep under Master-at-Arms, still resided in his muscles. Blow after blow, the watchers saw glimpses of brilliance. Snow kicked up in swirling gusts. In the corners of their vision, they might have imagined the ghosts of another duel, one that never happened in life, Robert's warhammer against Rhaegar's sword. But here, it was an altogether different dance. Jon lunged, seeking to end the match quickly. Rhaegar deftly sidestepped, bringing his blade down in an arc that Jon barely evaded. Their feet slid on packed snow, breath steaming in the air. Each recognized the other's skill, and they moved with increasing speed, neither wanting to yield. At last, after a rapid exchange of parries, Jon found an opening. He twisted his wrist, hooking Rhaegar's blade aside, and pressed his sword tip gently against Rhaegar's throat. Panting, Jon stared into those violet eyes that held a flicker of acceptance, if not surprise. "Well fought," Rhaegar said, raising his hands in surrender. Despite the flush in his cheeks, a small smile curved his lips. "My reflexes aren't what they were." Jon nodded, lowering his sword, something akin to respect passing through him. "You've not had much time to adjust," he said, voice quiet. "You'll get better." Those gathered let out a breath they hadn't realized they were holding. A few murmured that Jon had bested a Targaryen prince, but others argued that Rhaegar had spent 2 decades in the grave. Regardless, the tension eased as Rhaegar and Jon clasped forearms, a gesture of reluctant camaraderie. There would be no official victor that day, only an unspoken accord. They needed each other to survive what was coming. Night fell swiftly, and with it came renewed howls of wind that tore through the battlements. Snow began to fall in thick drifts. In the long hall of Castle Black, a meager fire crackled, casting dancing shadows on stone walls. Soldiers and wildlings huddled at the tables, scooping watery stew from wooden bowls, trying to ignore the harsh chill that seeped through gaps in the walls. Rhaegar found himself at the outskirts of a group near the hearth, listening rather than speaking. There were no minstrels here, no one to sing ballads or recount heroic deeds. Their talk was of whites, supply lines, and the fate of Eastwatch by the sea. The bleakness pressed down on them all. Eventually, he slipped away to a small alcove where a dusty old harp lay neglected, a relic left behind by a ranger who once fancied himself a bard. Rhaegar's breath caught when he saw it. Slowly, he lifted the instrument into his lap, running a calloused thumb over the strings. The wood was cracked, the strings out of tune. But in that moment, he felt an ache of memory. Once he had been famed for his music. Once, lords and ladies gathered in awe when he played. It felt like a dream from another life. He tried a chord, wincing at the discordant twang. One by one, he tightened the pegs, tuning by ear, ignoring the dryness in his throat. A hush fell in the hall as people turned to see him, the silver-haired figure adjusting the harp. A murmur ran through the onlookers. Was the dead prince about to play? Some stared with frank curiosity, others with cynicism. Ghost, who had wandered in with Jon, padded closer, ears perked. With a slow, careful exhalation, Rhaegar swept his fingers across the strings in a gentle arpeggio. The notes were soft and trembling at first, as if the harp itself was uncertain of finding its voice again. But after a moment, a fragile melody took shape. It flowed through the hush of the hall, weaving around the murmured conversation until it claimed the attention of every ear. The tune was wistful, reminiscent of old songs from the days of the Targaryen kings. It spoke of yearning, of regret, of a broken crown and the price of destiny. Even Tormund fell silent. Men who had been engaged in talk of war and the undead forgot their worries for a moment. The flickering fire seemed to brighten, lending the music a flicker of warmth. Jon Snow, stepping out from a side corridor, halted mid-step, struck by the sight. He watched as Rhaegar closed his eyes, letting the melody guide him, his silver hair catching the fire's glow. The piece tapered off, leaving silence in its wake. None dared clap or speak, for the music was a lament and its final note hung in the air like a held breath. Rhaegar slowly opened his eyes, his gaze distant. Then he stood, bowed his head slightly, and set the harp aside. Without a word, he walked from the hall, leaving a profound quiet behind him. Jon followed him out into the courtyard, the chill slapping his cheeks. Rhaegar stood with his back to the main door, gazing up at the stars that flickered behind ragged clouds. Snow drifted around him, a shifting tapestry of white. "That was beautiful," Jon said softly, approaching. "I've never heard such playing." Rhaegar did not turn. His breath rose in plumes of white. "I was a prince, a soldier, a singer, a father." His voice cracked on that last word. "And yet I feel I failed in all these roles. I cannot change the past. I can only hope to do some good in the time I have left." Jon opened his mouth to speak, to share the secret that burned in his heart. Yet the memory of Davos's caution held him back. He feared the consequences. He stared at Rhaegar's broad back, the tension there, the sorrow. "We all have our ghosts," Jon offered at last. "We just have to keep walking through the snow." Rhaegar nodded, still not turning, as if he feared that by looking upon Jon's face he might see a truth he wasn't ready to confront. "Then that is what we will do," he whispered. "For the sake of the living, we keep walking." News arrived the next morning. Eastwatch by the sea was under siege. The army of the dead had been spotted crossing patches of frozen water, encircling the fortress. Ravens soared in frantic flight, carrying pleas for reinforcements. Jon wasted no time in calling a war council. Wildling chieftains, Night's Watch officers, and Melisandre gathered in the drafty meeting chamber. Rhaegar stood off to the side, silent at first, listening. Jon laid it out plainly. "We cannot allow Eastwatch to fall without a fight. If the White Walkers breach it, they could flood through the eastern end of the wall, rendering our entire position here meaningless. We have to send men to reinforce." Ser Alliser Thorne, who had once been Jon's bitter opponent, was long dead. The new ranking officers recognized Jon as their best hope, albeit with some lingering resentment. A stoop-shouldered ranger cleared his throat. "But how many can we spare? Our own garrison is thin. Winterfell can send some troops, but it'll take time for them to arrive." Jon grimaced. "Time is something we don't have. I'll go with the men I can muster now, along with some wildlings who know the terrain. We have to slow the dead long enough for a larger force to come." Tormund grunted. "Count me in. I've fought those icy bastards before. We don't go, they'll swarm right through Eastwatch and march down the coast." Rhaegar spoke, his voice like quiet steel. "I will go too." All eyes turned to him. A few men exchanged uncertain glances. Melisandre's brow furrowed as though she feared for her newly resurrected charge. Jon studied Rhaegar. "It will be dangerous," Jon warned. "The Night King will be there." "All the more reason for me to stand with you," Rhaegar replied. He lifted his chin. "I was brought back for a reason. If this is it, then so be it." Jon nodded slowly, respect flickering across his features. "Then let's prepare," he said, turning to the assembly. "We march at first light." The men dispersed to gather weapons, rouse the horses, prepare supplies. The distant cry of wind through the battlements seemed to mock their urgency. The cold was unrelenting, but hearts burned with a fierce determination. They would not wait for the dead to come knocking. They would meet them in battle, no matter the odds. Dawn broke in a pallid haze, the sun scarcely visible behind thick clouds. A column of black-clad men, interspersed with wildlings draped in furs, departed Castle Black. Rhaegar rode alongside Jon near the front, their horses stamping and snorting in the cold. The battered banners of the Night's Watch flapped overhead, and every face in that column was set in grim resolve. Melisandre watched them go from the gate, her red robes billowing in the gusts, eyes burning with the knowledge that the moment of truth was drawing nearer. The journey across the frozen terrain was arduous. Snow drifted high, and the wind knifed through every layer of clothing. Yet they pressed on, each day bringing them closer to Eastwatch. Scouts reported sightings of strange shapes in the distance, glimpses of whites trailing at the edges of the world, always just out of range. At night, they circled around meager fires, taking turns on watch, eyes peeled for the glow of icy blue eyes in the darkness. Sleep was fitful, haunted by dreams of winter's endless hunger. During these nights, Rhaegar often found himself awake, gazing into the embers of a dying fire. The men around him slept fitfully, and the hush of the wind seemed to sing a lonely dirge. He recalled visions of the trident, of a woman with haunting gray eyes, of the child that was to be the savior of Westeros. Was it all a folly, or was that child standing watch across from him, dressed in black? One particular night, Jon approached silently. He took a seat beside Rhaegar, each man's breath mingling in the frozen air. For a while, neither spoke. Then Jon inhaled deeply. "I know we haven't spoken much about your past, about your family, but if we're riding to face the dead together, you deserve at least some truths." Rhaegar lifted his gaze, the flames reflecting in his violet eyes. His face was drawn, but curiosity shone there. "Truths?" Jon hesitated, remembering Davos's advice. Yet the pull of honesty was too strong. "I was told that Lyanna Stark, my father's sister, was taken by you, that it started Robert's rebellion. But she died in the Tower of Joy, and she had a child." A tremor passed through Rhaegar, as though a sudden wind had rattled him. "Yes," he breathed. "Our child. I barely knew him. The war. My father's madness. Everything unraveled so quickly." Jon's voice faltered, heavy with emotion. "She named him Aegon, but another believed him a bastard, gave him a different name. Ned Stark took that child in, to protect him from Robert Baratheon's wrath. That child grew up in Winterfell, knowing nothing of his true parents. Silence, vast as the northern sky, stretched between them. Rhaegar's eyes widened, flickers of realization coursing through them. His breath caught, and he stared at Jon as though seeing him for the first time in a piercing new light. You are my son." Jon swallowed hard, forcing himself to meet Rhaegar's gaze. "Yes, I only learned the truth recently. Ned Stark raised me to protect me. Robert would have, if he'd known." A choked sound escaped Rhaegar, part joy, part anguish. Tears glimmered in his eyes, though they did not fall. "I have dreamt of him, of you, in the realm beyond." He brought a trembling hand to his face. "All these years I thought you, and your mother, I thought I had failed you both. And now you stand before me, grown, a leader of men." Jon's chest tightened. "I'm sorry. I don't want to confuse you now, but I had to tell you before we risk everything in battle. I'm not sure what to call myself. I've been Jon Snow my entire life. Others call me king in the north. But if I am truly Aegon Targaryen, that changes everything." His voice wavered with the weight of that admission. Rhaegar reached out, tentatively resting a hand on Jon's shoulder. It was a gesture of paternal warmth Jon had never known. "No matter what you call yourself, you are my son. That is enough." His voice cracked, and for a moment, the ghost of a smile touched his lips. Then it faded, replaced by sorrow. "Your mother, Lyanna, she was brave, fierce. She loved you more than anything in the world. And my decisions cost her everything. I can never undo that." Jon shook his head. "It was a war of many mistakes. You were not the only one who caused it, and we can't change the past." He placed his gloved hand over Rhaegar's. "But maybe we can make a future if we stand together now." A sudden gust of wind whipped snow around them, and the fire sputtered. Rhaegar closed his eyes, breathing through the torrent of emotions that battered him. "To have found you. I can only thank the Lord of Light for this second chance," he whispered. "And if we survive the morrow, I vow I will not let you bear this burden alone. You are my blood, my heir. The realm needs you, and you shall have my sword." Jon's heart clenched. He gripped Rhaegar's arm firmly, forging a silent promise. The wind howled like a wounded beast, but in that small circle of light and flickering flames, father and son found a fragile bond that might yet shape the destiny of the living. At the break of dawn, they arrived on a ridge overlooking Eastwatch by the sea. A frigid wind lashed at them, carrying with it the scent of death. Below, the fortress stood in battered ruin, parts of its walls collapsed, smoke rising from the courtyard, the gates broken. A tide of white surged, clawing at defenders on the battlements. The sea beyond was frozen in patches, cracked with jagged lines of black water. The army of the dead poured across the ice, unstoppable in their numbers. And high above them, perched on an outcropping like a dreadful king surveying his conquest, was the Night King astride an undead dragon, its once golden scales now a sickly hue of decaying flesh, its eyes glowing an eerie, cold blue. Men muttered curses and prayers at the sight. Horses stamped nervously. Jon's face was grim, a muscle tightening in his jaw. Tormund stared, lips curled in disgust. Rhaegar felt a chill that had nothing to do with the wind. A monstrous winged shape circled overhead, letting out a shriek that echoed across the icy sea. Jon spurred his horse forward. We charge into them, draw their attention away from the fortress. If we can open a path, the defenders might regroup. Light your weapons with any flaming pitch we have. Aim for the White Walkers if you see them. Remember, only dragonglass or Valyrian steel can kill them. Do not get surrounded. The men roared their assent, though terror lurked in the corner of every eye. They set off, hoofs pounding, hearts hammering. The wildlings howled their battle cries, brandishing axes and spears tipped with obsidian. Night's Watch archers notched arrows wrapped in oil-soaked rags, ready to strike sparks that would set them aflame. Rhaegar's hand clenched around the hilt of the Valyrian steel sword Jon had given him. Every beat of his heart drummed with the realization that his every choice now mattered, not just for himself, but for Jon, for their shared blood, and for the realm they both vowed to protect. He kicked his horse into a gallop, riding close to Jon's flank. Father and son, united in a war that defied mortal imagination. They thundered down the ridge, plunging into the outskirts of the undead horde. The clash was immediate and ferocious. Whites shrieked in otherworldly dissonance, swarming forward with a single-minded hunger. Their flesh was blackened by frost, faces contorted in silent snarls. Swords and axes crashed, the metallic clang swallowed by the inhuman cacophony. Horses reared, biting and kicking at the tide of corpses. Jon slashed with long claw, severing limbs and splitting skulls. Rhaegar fought beside him, the Valyrian steel blade glinting with each strike. Every swing had to count, for the undead horde was vast. Once, Rhaegar stumbled as a white clawed at his horse's flank, but he regained his balance, hacking down the abomination, pressing forward. Archers released a volley of flaming arrows that rained death upon the back rows of the undead. Some whites toppled, engulfed in flames, but the rest pressed onward, heedless of fear or pain. Overhead, the undead dragon screeched, unleashing a blast of icy breath that froze men and whites alike, leaving behind statues of shattered ice. The Night King surveyed the battlefield with cold calculation, his pale visage betraying no emotion. A horn sounded from the fortress walls, a signal that the defenders recognized the arrival of Jon's force. Then the gates shuddered open. A ragged group of Eastwatch men charged out, led by a scrawny officer with a battered breastplate. They joined the fray, desperate to break the encirclement. But the swarm of whites threatened to close the gap. Tormund bashed his way through a knot of whites, roaring in savage glee. Jon, Rhaegar, and a handful of mounted warriors carved a path toward the fortress, hoping to link up with the defenders. The ground was slick with gore and melted snow. The tang of blood mingled with the bitter stench of decay. The living screamed, the dead moaned, steel clashed, bones crunched. It was chaos incarnate. Suddenly, a White Walker emerged from the swirling melee, tall, gaunt, with ice-blue skin that reflected the dying light. It wielded a spear of pure ice. With eerie grace, it skewered one of Jon's men, who disintegrated into shards of frost the moment the spear pierced his heart. Rhaegar let out a cry of rage, spurring his horse forward. The White Walker turned, fixing him with glowing eyes. Their blades met, Valyrian steel against cursed ice. A shriek of metal echoed as the Walker's spear cracked under the sword's edge. Rhaegar pressed harder, eyes narrowed, summoning every ounce of skill. With a final push, he shattered the spear's blade and drove his sword into the Walker's chest. The creature let out a resonant shriek, dissolving in a burst of icy shards that vanished into the air. Chest heaving, Rhaegar looked around. More whites closed in, but Jon was there, Longclaw cutting them down. Together, they pushed toward the fortress gate, swirling around pockets of undead. The men of Eastwatch fought valiantly, their faces contorted in desperation. A horrified cry went up from behind. Another White Walker had joined the battle, flanked by half a dozen Whites. It advanced swiftly, cutting a swath through the living. Rhaegar realized the threat in a heartbeat. If that walker was not stopped, it would flank Jon's men and trap them between two forces. Without hesitation, Rhaegar veered his horse around and charged the White Walker, hoping to draw its attention. The walker sneered, brandishing a jagged ice sword. Rhaegar dismounted, facing it on foot to ensure no chance of being unseated. They circled each other, the wind whipping snow around their feet. The walker struck first, swinging the ice blade in a graceful arc. Rhaegar countered, sparks flying. The cold radiating from the walker's weapon numbed his fingers, but he held firm, his soul blazing with a newfound purpose. The second chance granted him by the Lord of Light was not for naught. Behind them, Whites converged, climbing over corpses, eager to devour. The White Walker, sensing Rhaegar's strength, redoubled its assault, each strike more deadly than the last. Rhaegar felt his heartbeat thunder. Images flashed in his mind. Lyanna's gentle smile, the face of his newborn son, a crown of rubies scattered on a bloody river. And then the face of Jon Snow, determined, calling him father not by word but by acceptance. If he died now, what would become of them all? He roared, mustering every last bit of will, and lunged forward with a desperate thrust. The walker parried, but Rhaegar shifted, stepping inside its reach. With a brutal slash, he carved through the walker's torso. An unearthly shriek tore the air as the creature shattered into crystalline fragments. Gasping, Rhaegar sank to his knees, exhausted. All around, the Whites that the walker commanded stumbled, momentarily disoriented without their master's guiding presence. The living struck, hacking them down. Jon's voice rang out. Into the fortress. Regroup. Men flooded through the gate. Tormund hefted an injured soldier onto his shoulder, cursing and spitting as he did so. Rhaegar forced himself to his feet, staggering toward the gate. He saw Jon waving him on, eyes wide with concern. The last stragglers raced in as the Eastwatch defenders slammed the gates shut behind them, propping it with a makeshift barricade. The courtyard was a wreck of bodies, rubble, and burning debris. But for the moment, they held it. Jon rushed over to Rhaegar, who braced himself against a wall, breathing hard. Blood trickled down the side of Rhaegar's face, but he couldn't tell if it was his own or someone else's. Are you hurt? Jon demanded, scanning him for wounds. Rhaegar shook his head, swallowing. I'm fine, he managed. A distant roar drew their attention skyward, the undead dragon soared overhead, unleashing another blast of freezing breath. Part of the fortress wall groaned and collapsed under the onslaught, sending men tumbling to their doom. The Night King watched from above, a silent sentinel of death. The situation was dire. Even if they had temporarily secured the courtyard, the undead horde still swarmed outside, and the dragon's attacks threatened to demolish them completely. They'll keep coming, Jon said grimly. The walls won't hold much longer. We need to kill the Night King if we can. That's our only chance to end this. Rhaegar's eyes flicked to the looming specter of the Night King. He recalled stories of how one hero, Azor Ahai, forged Lightbringer to push back the darkness. Could that hero be Jon? Could it be himself? Was destiny something they could share? He grasped Jon's arm. We do it together. Before Jon could respond, a thunderous crash shook the fortress. The main tower lurched, its foundation buckling under repeated icy blasts from the undead dragon. Terrified screams echoed through the yard. Tormund shouted at the men to form ranks. The front gate was beginning to splinter as well, hammered by the unending press of Whites. Splinters rained down. Jon locked eyes with Rhaegar, the same desperate thought mirrored in both sets of eyes. If we fail here, the dead will sweep south unopposed. They sprinted toward a flight of crumbling stairs that led to a rampart partially collapsed by the dragon's assault. A handful of archers crouched there, firing arrows at the undead, but the barrage was barely a scratch on that massive beast. The archers parted to let Jon and Rhaegar through. The vantage from the rampart offered a chilling panorama. A sea of Whites encircled Eastwatch, their pale hands clawing at the stone walls, their hungry moans blending into a grotesque chorus. And high above soared the undead dragon, the Night King perched like doom incarnate. Dragonglass javelins, Jon shouted to one of the archers. We have any? The man nodded, face ashen with fear, and pointed to a crate. Jon and Rhaegar yanked it open, finding a makeshift stockpile of spearheads fashioned from dragon glass. They hastily attached them to wooden shafts. The next moment, the undead dragon swooped closer, its hollow eyes fixated on the wall. Jon aimed a javelin, drawing back his arm, but the dragon veered away, out of range. It was no mindless beast. The Night King guided it expertly. "He won't let us get a clean shot," Jon muttered. "We need a distraction." Rhaegar clenched his jaw. "Or we need to go to him." Jon flashed him a grim look. "How?" They scanned the courtyard. Horses were gone, either slain or panicked. The battered tower offered a higher vantage, but it was treacherously unstable. Rhaegar squared his shoulders. "We climb the tower, get above him. If he passes close enough, we throw these." Jon's eyes flicked to the tower. Debris rained from its listing roof with each impact. Chunks of stone threatened to peel away at any moment. Yet he knew time was running short. "Then let's move." They dashed across the courtyard, weaving around the wreckage and fallen men. Whites began to pour over the walls in places, but Tormund and the remaining fighters held them off as best they could. The tower's entrance was half blocked by rubble, forcing Rhaegar and Jon to squeeze through a narrow gap. Inside, the stairwell creaked ominously with every step. Cold air whistled through cracks, and dust filled their lungs. They ascended cautiously, every nerve on edge, hearing the tower groan under the repeated onslaught. At last, they reached a crumbling platform near the top, open to the sky where part of the roof had caved in. The wind howled, and from here, they could see the entire courtyard below, strewn with flames and corpses. The undead dragon circled overhead, occasionally strafing the walls with blasts of ice. The Night King's silhouette was stark against the ashen sky. Jon gripped a javelin, knuckles white. Rhaegar took a position on the opposite side of the platform, ready to hurl his own. They braced themselves, scanning the skies. The dragon roared, swooping in. Heartbeats thundered in their ears. "Now!" Jon yelled as the beast banked toward them, dark wings blotting out the weak sunlight. They both launched their javelins in a desperate throw. The weapons soared through the air. The Night King, with supernatural reflexes, pulled the dragon's head aside. Jon's javelin missed entirely, embedding itself in the dragon's flank but doing little more than glancing off bone and rotted scales. Rhaegar's found a mark nearer the beast's chest, but it too failed to penetrate deeply enough to bring the creature down. The undead dragon shrieked in fury, swerving away, and the Night King fixed them with a malevolent, icy glare. "Damn," Jon cursed, his breath ragged. "We need a direct hit to kill him." Below, the fortress gates exploded inwards under the relentless surge of whites. A fresh wave poured into the courtyard, overwhelming defenders. Screams carried up to the tower. The men were outnumbered 10-1. Rhaegar's eyes snapped to Jon. "If we don't stop him here and now." The dragon veered again, swinging around for a devastating pass. The Night King raised his spear of ice, aiming at the tower. The walls trembled under the unearthly shriek of the undead beast. Jon realized with horror that they had no way to dodge this from their precarious perch. The tower would be blasted to rubble. He grabbed Rhaegar's arm. "Get back!" But it was too late. The dragon unleashed its freezing breath. The stone around them cracked and split. The platform collapsed in a cacophony of stone and timber. Jon and Rhaegar plunged downward amidst the debris the wind knocked from their lungs. Chunks of masonry rained around them as the tower's upper section buckled entirely. Jon landed hard on a lower level, the impact driving the breath from his body. Blood pounded in his ears. Pain shot through his leg. He struggled to rise, dust clogging his throat. Across the rubble-strewn floor, Rhaegar lay motionless, pinned beneath a fallen beam. The roof above groaned in protest, threatening to bury them both. Jon forced himself to crawl, ignoring the sharp agony in his ribs. "Rhaegar," he choked out. Rhaegar's eyes fluttered open. He coughed, spitting blood. "Jon," he rasped. Jon gritted his teeth, grappling with the beam. It was too heavy. He pressed his back against a broken pillar, bracing himself, mustering all the strength he could. Slowly, painfully, he lifted the beam enough for Rhaegar to roll free. The prince gasped as he pulled himself out, a grimace twisting his features. He clutched his side, where blood stained his black leathers. The tower threatened to fully collapse. "We have to get out," Jon urged, hauling Rhaegar to his feet. The older man staggered, leaning heavily on Jon. Together, they stumbled toward a gaping hole where part of the wall had sheared away. Below, the courtyard was chaos incarnate. The living had been pushed back, their lines collapsing under the unending assault. The undead dragon perched atop the wrecked gate, unleashing carnage on anyone who dared approach. Jon's heart sank. It's over. Eastwatch is lost. Already, pockets of men were fleeing into corridors, chased by throngs of wights. The defenders on the ramparts were either dead or out of arrows. Rhaegar's voice was hoarse. We can't let them break through, or all of Westeros is doomed. A distant horn blast made both men pause. Through the swirling snow and smoke, they spotted massive shapes in the sky, dragons, living dragons. Daenerys Targaryen had arrived, leading a force from Dragonstone. Two great beasts, one black with red membranes, the other greenish bronze, roared as they descended upon the horde of the dead. Their fire rained down in torrents of blazing destruction, incinerating wights by the hundreds. A third dragon was absent, lost to the Night King, now turned against the living. In the courtyard, men who still drew breath let out ragged cheers. The advantage teetered back as Daenerys' forces swept in. Dothraki riders galloped across the ice, whooping war cries, slicing through undead ranks. The living dragons clashed midair with the undead one, roaring, biting, flames meeting ice. The sky itself seemed to tear from the elemental struggle. Jon felt a surge of hope. We must help them, he said, glancing at Rhaegar, who was leaning against the shattered masonry, clutching his side, pale with blood loss. The silver-haired prince nodded, jaw clenched in pain. Go, he urged. I'll only slow you down. Jon shook his head vehemently. Not a chance. With effort, he hoisted Rhaegar's arm over his shoulder. They descended the broken stairs into the courtyard, the stench of death and ash thick in the air. Together, they fought through the wights that harried them. Jon's sword flashed, Rhaegar gritted his teeth, every motion a torment. But they pressed on, back to back, father and son forging a path through nightmares. Above them, Daenerys' black dragon, Drogon, engaged the undead dragon in a savage aerial duel. The Night King hurled a spear of ice, narrowly missing Drogon's wing as Daenerys guided him. The greenish-bronze dragon raked at the undead beast's flank, tearing rotted flesh from bone. The undead dragon responded with an icy blast, forcing the living dragon to break off in agony. Yet the living dragons circled, refusing to yield, breathing plumes of fire that lit the twilight sky. On the ground, Dothraki and unsullied reinforcements clashed with the undead in a swirling mass of steel and flesh. The wights, though endless in number, now faced the combined might of two living dragons and an army at least as large as the defenders had once hoped for. The tide of battle teetered. Jon and Rhaegar found themselves side by side with Jorah Mormont, Grey Worm, and other allies they'd scarcely hoped to see. Jorah recognized Jon at once, offering a stiff nod. We came as fast as we could. The Queen insisted once we heard word of Eastwatch's distress. His eyes flicked to Rhaegar, confused by the uncanny resemblance to the Targaryen line. Who? Jon blocked a white strike with Longclaw, beheading it in a single motion. A friend. Long story. No time for explanations. We need to kill the Night King, he snapped, pointing to the looming figure on the undead dragon overhead. Jorah grimaced. Well, if the dragons can't get close enough to do it, we'll need another way. A wight lunged at him. He speared it with Heartsbane, the Valyrian blade that Samwell Tarly had entrusted him with. The creature shrieked and collapsed. Jorah's eyes darted around. We might have a chance if we can force him to land. In that moment, Daenerys dive-bombed on Drogon, flames erupting from the dragon's jaws, engulfing the undead dragon. The Night King raised a hand, weaving some dark magic that partially shielded him. Still, he pulled the beast back, drifting lower, searching for an angle to counterattack. Wights parted below as the undead dragon's massive form descended toward the ground. That's our chance, Jon growled, spurring himself forward. The living parted in turn for him, Rhaegar, and Jorah as they sprinted across the wrecked courtyard, ignoring the throbbing of wounds and the biting cold. They leapt over the fallen, cut down straggling wights, forging a path through the chaos. The undead dragon landed with a thunderous crash, its tail whipping out and smashing a group of men to pulp. The Night King dismounted, glacial eyes scanning the battlefield. A hush seemed to fall around him. Wights shrank back, giving him space as if acknowledging his supremacy. He began to stride toward a cluster of defenders, ice spear in hand. Jon and Jorah converged on him from one side, Rhaegar from the other, his sword arm trembling with exertion. The Night King turned his cold gaze upon Rhaegar first, as if drawn to the Targaryen's resurrected essence. Time slowed as Rhaegar raised his Valyrian steel blade. The Night King's expression remained inscrutable, yet something like recognition flickered in his icy eyes. Here stood a prince of old blood, one who had been snatched back from death by fire magic. Their blades collided, the Night King's spear howling with unnatural cold. Rhaegar gritted his teeth, the shock of the impact rattling his bones. Jon and Jorah attacked from behind, but the Night King spun with inhuman speed, blocking Jorah's slash and parrying Jon's overhead strike in a flurry of movement. The cold radiating from his spear caused frost to bloom along the edges of the steel. Jon felt agony bloom in his arms as the chill seeped through him. Jorah staggered back, nearly dropping Heartsbane as ice climbed the blade. Only Rhaegar's intervention forced the Night King to shift focus, allowing Jorah a moment to regroup. The Night King retaliated with a sweeping strike that shattered the cobblestones, sending shards of ice and stone flying. Rhaegar stumbled, blood seeping from the tear in his side. Jon lunged, aiming long claw at the Night King's flank, but the spear whipped around, forcing him back. Each exchange was a dance with death, the Night King's reflexes and power surpassing anything they'd faced before. The undead dragon loomed behind its master, rearing its head to unleash another blast of ice, but Daenerys swooped in on Drogon, tackling the undead beast away in a thunderous collision of scales. The ground shook with the force of their impact. The living and the dead both scattered. Fire and ice clashed overhead. Panting, Jon circled the Night King, who stood as cold and unyielding as a glacier. Frost clung to Jon's beard and his limbs felt leaden, but he would not falter. Jorah coughed, forcing out words. "We must end him." Rhaegar nodded, face drawn, each breath labored. They attacked in unison. Jorah feinted low, Jon hammered at the Night King's torso, and Rhaegar aimed a thrust at his neck. The Night King spun like a tempest of ice, parrying or dodging each blow. His spear nicked Jorah's arm, encasing part of it in freezing crystals. Jorah cried out, forced to drop Heartsbane. Jon pressed forward, every muscle screaming, his blade colliding with the Night King's spear in a ring of steel. The vibration nearly tore the weapon from his grasp, but he held on, teeth gritted. Then Rhaegar, with a final surge of resolve, struck from the other side. His Valyrian steel blade bit deep into the Night King's flank. A hiss escaped the ancient entity, something almost like surprise. The Night King backhanded Rhaegar with supernatural strength, throwing him to the ground. But the wound was made. Seizing the opening, Jon roared, plunging Longclaw into the Night King's chest. At the same moment, Jorah, ignoring the ice creeping up his arm, drove a dragoglass dagger into the creature's back. The combined assault staggered the Night King. He let out a guttural sound halfway between a growl and a shriek. Frost crackled across Jon's sword, threatening to shatter it, but he twisted the blade, pushing deeper. The Night King's icy eyes fixed on Jon, a silent malice in them. A sudden shudder passed through the Night King's body. He looked down at the blade's eye, impaling him. With an unearthly wail, he began to crack, spiderwebs of ice fracturing across his form. Then, as if the cold had never truly been real, he exploded into a flurry of shards that disintegrated in the wind. For a heartbeat, the battlefield froze in stillness. Then, as the Night King's death resonated across the hordes, wights collapsed en masse. Their bodies crumpled to the ground, lifeless once more. The undead dragon, locked in deadly combat with Drogon, gave a final rasping shriek and crumbled into lifeless bone and frozen flesh. The threat that had loomed for endless nights evaporated in the span of a few heartbeats. A hush fell, broken only by ragged breathing and the distant roar of flames. Stunned survivors looked around, scarcely believing the tide had turned. The White Walkers, too, shattered if any remained, leaving behind only drifting snow. Jon stood amid the remains, panting, pain throbbing in every joint. Jorah collapsed to one knee, clutching his frostbitten arm. Rhaegar lay prone on the ground where he had been struck. Jon rushed over, heart in his throat. He dropped to his knees beside his father. Rhaegar's eyes were open, but blood trickled from his mouth and his breath was shallow. "Rhaegar!" Jon cried, voice breaking. Rhaegar managed a faint smile, his eyes flickering with relief at seeing Jon alive. He tried to speak, but coughed up more blood. Jon pressed a hand to Rhaegar's side, where the wound was worst, desperately trying to stem the flow. Warm tears blurred his vision. Men shouted for a maester, though few healers had braved this far north. The courtyard around them was strewn with the remnants of a once unstoppable army. Daenerys landed nearby, dismounting Drogon, her expression a mix of horror and wonder. She rushed over, recognized Rhaegar's face, her own eyes going wide with disbelief and some echo of familial instinct. "What, how?" Jon clenched his jaw, cradling Rhaegar's head. "He's your brother," he managed, voice hoarse. Melisandre brought him back. His throat tightened as Rhaegar groaned softly, life slipping away. "Stay with me," Jon pleaded, pressing his forehead to Rhaegar's. "We won. You got your second chance." Rhaegar's lips parted in a whisper Jon had to lean close to hear. "I am proud of you. Aegon, you are my son." His voice broke on the last word, tears filling his violet eyes. Then the light in them flickered, dimming. Jon choked back a sob, feeling Rhaegar's heartbeat falter against his hand. He glanced around for help, but the victory was too new, the healers too far, his father's wounds too grave. Slowly, Rhaegar's eyes slid shut, his final breath leaving him in a trembling sigh. Jon held him close, tears mingling with the blood and grime on his face. Daenerys knelt beside them, tears glistening in her own eyes. She placed a gentle hand on Rhaegar's cooling brow. "Brother," she whispered, voice shuddering with grief. The man she had never known, now lost to her again. The fires of battle still burned and the wounded cried out for aid. Yet in that moment, for Jon, the world grew silent. He mourned for a father he had never known in life, only to find in the final hour of an impossible war. Darkness rimmed his vision and the heartbreak squeezed his chest like a vice. He lifted his head, gazing at the swirling snow and the dawn sky tinted with the faintest hint of red. He remembered Melisandre's words that the Lord of Light gave second chances for a reason. Perhaps Rhaegar's destiny was not to live a second life but to pass on his legacy to ensure the rightful champion would stand at the moment of truth. All around them, the combined forces of the living took stock of their impossible victory. Wails of relief and grief echoed off ruined walls. The threat of the White Walkers was vanquished, but at great cost. Many had given their lives, and in the center of it all lay the silent form of Rhaegar Targaryen, his silver hair stained with blood. Jon pressed a hand to his father's face, closing his eyes one last time. Then, slowly, he got to his feet, turning to the men and women who had survived. Daenerys rose beside him, tears drying on her cheeks. Their dragons roared in the distance, a triumphant echo carried on the wind. A hush fell as Jon locked eyes with those around him. Wildlings, men of the Night's Watch, Unsullied, Dothraki, northern soldiers. They saw a man, battered and torn, who had led them to stand against the night, to face what none had ever dared dream they could defeat. In that collective hush, the first rays of true dawn broke over the horizon, gilding the snow and the broken walls of Eastwatch with a pale gold light. The Night King was gone, the army of the dead scattered to dust. The Great War, the war for the dawn, was won. Jon cast one final, lingering look upon Rhaegar's still form, feeling a bittersweet surge of gratitude and sorrow. Their shared blood had forged a bond stronger than the fleeting illusions of crowns. It was the bond that had led them both here, to the end of the world, so that the living might see another sunrise. And as Jon stepped forward, guiding the living to secure the fortress and tend the wounded, he felt Rhaegar's memory stirring within him, an echo of harp strings on a quiet night, a reminder that love and sacrifice would forever shape the destiny of Westeros. They would burn Rhaegar's body on a pyre that evening, granting him the Targaryen funeral he had never received, his ashes drifting into the cold sea breeze. Jon Snow, Aegon Targaryen, stood beside Daenerys and the somber ranks of survivors, heads bowed in respect. Tears shimmered in the firelight, but there was a quiet pride, too, in what they had achieved together. In the end, Melisandre's gamble had changed the course of history. Rhaegar had returned from death, not to claim a throne, but to lend his sword and his heart to the final battle. He had found his son, and for a fleeting moment, they had stood united against the darkness. Whatever songs were sung of that day would speak of tragedy and triumph in equal measure. They would recount how the Prince of Dragonstone rose again to stand beside the bastard of Winterfell who was no bastard at all, and how father and son confronted the very heart of winter and emerged victorious. And so the dawn came to Westeros, red and sorrowful, yet full of promise for a new era. The snows of winter would eventually recede, leaving behind memories of unimaginable sacrifice. And in each telling of that final battle at Eastwatch by the sea, the name of Rhaegar Targaryen, reborn by the grace of fire, would be remembered not as a tragic cause of a past rebellion, but as a prince who, in the final reckoning, helped save the realms of men. The pyre burned in the courtyard of Eastwatch by the sea, sending embers spiraling into the twilight sky. The northern wind carried the scent of salt and ash out over the frozen sea. Soldiers, freed folk, and men of the Night's Watch stood in a broad circle around the flames, silent in mourning. Many had lost friends or kin that day, but no loss loomed larger than that of Rhaegar Targaryen, resurrected only to perish again at the hour of victory. Jon Snow, Aegon Targaryen, though few here knew him by that name, stood closest to the pyre, shoulders rigid beneath a drab wool cloak. Melisandre had told him that fire was how Targaryens were given back to the world at the end, and so he honored his father as best he could in this ruined fortress. Daenerys Targaryen, her face streaked with soot and tears, stood beside Jon, a thin dusting of snow gathering in her pale hair. All around, the battered remnants of her forces mingled with wildlings and the Watch, forging a vigil of unity amid the smoldering rubble. Ser Davos hovered at the edge, arms folded, his weathered face somber. Grey Worm was present, stoic as ever, while Jorah Mormont used a makeshift sling for his half-frozen arm. Nearby, Tormund Giantsbane watched with an uncharacteristic solemnity. He and Rhaegar had sparred together not so many days ago. Though Tormund had jested about fancy dragon princes, he could not deny the man's bravery in the last battle. The flames crackled hungrily, devouring the wood and cloth and flesh. Rhaegar's silver hair, once so vivid, was already lost to the embers. Jon inhaled the bitter air, a knot of grief coiling in his chest. He had never known his true father, only glimpsed him at the end. Yet that fleeting bond felt as real as any he had known. Rhaegar's final words still echoed in Jon's mind. "I am proud of you, Aegon." With those words, father and son had recognized each other at last. The Watchers remained until only ash and glowing embers remained in the pyre. Even then, Daenerys lingered, tears drying on her cheeks. Through parted lips, she softly uttered a farewell in Valyrian, too low for any but Jon to catch. The wind carried her words away. Eventually, she turned and inclined her head, a regal dip despite her exhaustion. "He was my brother," she said, voice husky. "Yet I never truly knew him. If he found peace in the end, I am grateful." Jon nodded. He wanted to offer some comfort, but the words would not form. It was too soon, too raw. Instead, he gently took her arm, guiding her inside the battered fortress. Men trickled away from the pyre, returning to their meager shelters in the battered keep, or to the supply stores if they still had the strength to lift a sack of grain. The courtyard emptied, but the memory of that funeral pyre lingered over Eastwatch like a ghost. While Daenerys' forces and Jon's men worked to clear the fortress of debris and give the slain a proper burning, Melisandre wandered the corridors alone. She was exhausted by her great magic, and though her face bore that unearthly, timeless quality, there were new shadows beneath her red eyes. She had channeled the Lord of Light's power twice, raising men from death, first Jon, then Rhaegar, and both times it had claimed part of her own vitality. She touched the wall for balance, quiet footfalls echoing in the gloom. She wondered if Rhaegar would forgive her for losing Rhaegar a second time, or if indeed the Lord of Light had intended for him only to fight this final battle. Ultimately, she told herself victory had been won. The army of the dead lay scattered to the winds. Perhaps that was enough. In the days that followed, Eastwatch by the sea struggled to rebuild. Though winter still ruled the land, the Night King's destruction no longer loomed. Scores of men nursed injuries, from frostbitten limbs to jagged wounds inflicted by wights. Daenerys' remaining 2 dragons, Drogon and Rhaegal, perched on the fortress walls, warily watching the horizon. The wights were gone, but the devastation they'd left behind was plain for all to see. Few had time or inclination to dwell on politics, yet the question of kingship was unavoidable. While some men from the north still addressed Jon as their king, Daenerys' followers called her the rightful queen of the 7 kingdoms. Amid the flurry of rebuilding and burying the dead, they found themselves dancing around that central tension. Jon had knelt to Daenerys once, pledging the North's support in the fight against the dead. But now the war was done. What next? For a time, they put aside the topic. Others whispered of Rhaegar Targaryen's mysterious presence on the battlefield, and the even more perplexing detail that he had seemed to know Jon intimately. Rumors swelled like a tide, uncertain and half-formed. Jon and Daenerys shared no public explanation, each grappling with private grief and weariness. Eventually, ravens were sent to Winterfell and to the lords sworn to House Stark, informing them that the White Walkers were destroyed. The same word went to the Eyrie, to Riverrun, and beyond. At Daenerys' request, messages flew south as well, to whatever pockets of loyal Targaryen or Baratheon supporters might remain. and to the Dornish princes who had once aided House Targaryen. King's Landing, occupied by Cersei Lannister, was not ignored. One raven was sent there too, carrying a carefully worded missive from the Dragon Queen. The fate of the Seven Kingdoms had changed, and alliances or enmities might shift. As the worst of the wounded recovered, and snowstorms momentarily eased, Daenerys declared her intention to fly to Winterfell, where she and Jon might combine forces for a more secure march south. The realm had to learn that the Great War was finished, and perhaps a new era could begin. Some advised her to remain at Eastwatch, or to sail directly for Dragonstone, but she insisted. Winterfell was the seat of the North, and from there they could plan their final moves with Sansa Stark and the Northern Lords. Jon himself was anxious to return home, to see his siblings again, though the knowledge of his parentage gnawed at him. Sansa, Arya, and Bran still believed him Ned Stark's son. He wrestled with how or whether to reveal the truth. Rhaegar had left him with that single paternal connection, but revealing it might upend everything. Eventually, the day came to depart. The sky was iron gray, but the winds were calm enough for flight. Daenerys mounted Drogon, Yora at her side, while Rhaegar flew on the Dragon Queen's other flank. Even short a dragon, the presence of two living beasts was imposing. Jon chose to ride with the ground party, escorting the baggage train of Eastwatch men, wildlings, and any who wished to accompany them. Tormund accompanied him on foot, wearing thick furs and a grin that belied his sadness for the fallen. Ser Davos took charge of logistics, ensuring supplies were loaded properly for the journey. They set off across the frozen expanse, forging a slow path inland. Though the whites were gone, winter's teeth still bit, and the roads were choked with ice. Daenerys and her dragons flew overhead in leisurely arcs, scouting for trouble. After so long battling the undead, mere cold and snow felt almost like mercy. The trek took several days. They wound across bleak white plains, past stands of skeletal trees. Occasionally, a lone farmhouse emerged from the whiteness, abandoned or inhabited by wary small folk who offered them meager shelter. Some recognized Jon Snow and nearly wept with relief at the news that the dead were no more. Others eyed Daenerys's dragons with terror. The column pressed on, step by freezing step, hearts buoyed by the knowledge that the world no longer ended in a tide of corpses. As they neared Winterfell, the sky lightened just enough for hints of sunlight to glimmer on the castle's walls. Jon felt a pang. He remembered leaving this place to journey south so many moons ago, uncertain if he would ever return. Now, he came back changed in ways he could scarcely articulate. At his side rode Tormund, occasionally regaling men with outlandish stories to keep their spirits up. Daenerys circled overhead, guiding Drogon and Rhaegar to land outside the castle's perimeter. Even from a distance, Jon could see movement on the battlements, men hurrying to get a closer look at the approaching dragons. Word of their arrival had preceded them by Raven, so the gates opened at once, and a guard of honor emerged to greet them. In front stood Sansa Stark, cloaked in white wolf furs, her copper hair pinned back from her face. Beside her was Arya, her gray eyes watchful, wearing a practical outfit and a dagger at her belt. Bran Stark waited in his wheeled chair, pushed by a nameless servant. Around them gathered various northern bannermen, their breath visible in the crisp air. Jon dismounted. The moment his boots touched the snowy ground, Sansa hurried forward, her composure wavering. Arya trailed close behind, her expression less openly emotional, but her eyes glimmered with something warmer than her usual stoicism. Jon embraced his sisters in turn, relief and joy surging through him. He noted how they had changed. Arya looked older, calmer, her face etched with experiences she did not speak of. Sansa held herself with regal authority, a far cry from the frightened girl who had once dreamed of being a queen. "Are you all right?" Sansa asked, voice trembling with concern. "We heard rumors that the dead were marching on Eastwatch, and then we heard about dragons and the battle and—" "Oh, Jon." Her hand lingered on his arm, as if reassuring herself that he was real. "I'm alive," Jon said gently, offering a tight smile. He turned to Arya, who regarded him with a tilted head and something akin to wonder. You have no idea how good it is to see you." Her hug was swift and fierce. Then she pulled away, eyes flicking to Daenerys, who had come forward in her own regal bearing. "So it's true," Arya murmured. "You've brought another Targaryen to Winterfell." Jon grimaced, noticing how the northern lords fidgeted at the sight of Daenerys, who approached with all the composure of a queen. Behind her, Drogon and Rhaegar lurked just outside the gates, rumbling softly. Bran observed them with detached curiosity. His clear, calm gaze caught Jon's, as though reading every secret in his brother's mind. Daenerys addressed Sansa, bowing her head courteously. "Lady of Winterfell, I thank you for your hospitality. We have come bearing news of our victory against the Night King. Without your brother's help, we could not have prevailed." Sansa studied Daenerys for a moment, her face carefully composed. "The North is grateful for any friend who stands against the dead. We welcome you, your grace." There was a formality there, but also a guarded caution. The memory of how the North once bled under Targaryen kings was not so easily forgotten. They made their way inside the castle. Warm torches lit the great hall. Servants hurried to arrange seating for Daenerys' retinue while stabling was found for the horses. The two dragons remained outside, though they occasionally bellowed in protest, ruffling the nerves of watchers on the walls. Soon enough, a hastily prepared meal was laid out on long tables. Men who had marched north from Eastwatch devoured it with gratitude, while wildlings eyed the fare with mild suspicion but ate anyway. At the head table sat Jon, Daenerys, Sansa, Arya, Bran, and a few chosen lords, Lady Brienne of Tarth, now sworn to Sansa's service, Davos Seaworth, Tormund Giantsbane, and a handful of northern bannermen who had come to hear the news firsthand. A hush settled over the gathering as Jon rose to speak. He recounted the final battle at Eastwatch, the arrival of Daenerys' dragons, the fierce clash against the undead, and the death of the Night King. He spared them the more harrowing details of Rhaegar's resurrection, speaking only of an unlikely ally lost in the victory. Many eyes flicked between Jon and Daenerys, but no one dared interrupt. Tormund, never one for ceremony, stood as Jon finished. "Well, I saw it with my own two eyes," he said, jabbing a thumb at his chest. "The dead were as endless as the snow, but somehow we cut 'em down. Couldn't we done it without the Dragon Queen and her beasts, that much is certain. Or without Jon Snow, the man who was too stubborn to die." A ripple of subdued laughter broke the tension. Tormund's face turned serious. "But that war's done now, and it's time we all think about what comes next. Because I'm no southerner, but I can smell a fight for the throne on the wind." That blunt statement hung over the tables. Men shifted in their seats. Sansa's lips thinned. She cast a sidelong glance at Jon, as if to say, "Here is where we find trouble." But Daenerys spoke up calmly, her voice carrying through the hall. "I know many in the north have no love for House Targaryen. My ancestors committed grievous acts, as have some lords in the south. But I am here in peace. We have ended the Crete of the White Walkers. Now I wish to unite the realm and bring prosperity to all. I humbly ask for your allegiance, but I will not force it." Sansa lifted her chin. "We are grateful for your help. You have our respect, your grace, but you must understand. The North has bled under Southern rule time and again. Jon Snow is the king in the North, chosen by acclamation. He bent the knee before the threat of the dead. Now that threat is gone." Daenerys' gaze flickered to Jon. It was a delicate moment. Jon swallowed, feeling the weight of eyes upon him. He had not fully explained his parentage to his sisters. Only a handful knew the truth. Davos suspected, Melisandre knew, perhaps Bran did too by his strange powers. But unveiling it here could cause upheaval. It might undermine Daenerys, or it might rally the North behind him in ways he did not desire. Still, the realm deserved honesty. His father had perished to help them earn this dawn. He should not be hidden like a shameful secret. He stood again, turning to the northern lords. "Daenerys Targaryen is no tyrant. She is just and seeks the good of the realm. For the sake of unity, for the sake of honoring those who died to stop the dead, I ask you to welcome her. Not as an enemy, but as an ally, or even your rightful queen." A silence, and then Arya broke in, eyes glittering. "Are you truly convinced, Jon? You've always been protective of the North. Is this about gratitude for her help, or something more?" Jon stared at Arya, recalling their closeness in childhood. She had been his fierce little sister, always ready to defend him. Now her directness put him on the spot, but he couldn't truly blame her. "I believe it's the only way forward," he said after a pause. "We cannot afford another war between North and South. The realm needs healing, and Daenerys has proven herself in battle and in mercy." Not everyone looked convinced, but neither did they rise to defy him. Sansa's expression was reserved, as if storing her opinions until a more private moment. Nonetheless, the immediate tension settled enough for the feast to resume. The talk turned to supply lines, the state of roads, the best route south if Daenerys wished to confront Cersei Lannister. Winterfell bustled with a semblance of relief that the worst was over, even if new uncertainties loomed. Later that evening, after the hall had cleared, and the men went to their beds or cups, Jon met Sansa in the solar. The chamber was lit by a single brazier, the dancing flames casting flickers of light across tapestries that depicted the old Stark kings. Sansa poured herself a cup of warmed wine, took a measured sip, and then pinned Jon with a knowing look. "You're hiding something," she said simply. Jon sighed, raking a hand through his hair. "You've grown too perceptive for my comfort, sister." She didn't smile. "Arya suspects it. I can see it in Bran's eyes too, though he speaks so little these days. You returned from the wall a changed man. And then at Eastwatch there was all that talk about a prince who fought alongside you. Targaryen banners, Targaryen blood. If there's something we need to know, you should tell us now before it grows into a worse problem." Jon hesitated. He could try to deny it, but that would only postpone the inevitable. Bran, with his powers as the three-eyed raven, likely knew everything already. Guilt and worry churned in Jon's gut, yet the truth needed to be spoken. He drew a deep breath. "Ned Stark was not my father," he began. "My mother was Lyanna Stark. My father was Rhaegar Targaryen." Sansa set her cup down so abruptly that wine sloshed over the rim. She stared at him, eyes wide, the flickering brazier casting shadows on her astonished face. "That can't be. Father always said you were his a." "It was a lie to protect me," Jon explained, forcing the words out in a strained tone. "Robert Baratheon would have killed any Targaryen he found. Ned Stark risked his honor to keep me safe. Lyanna was his sister, and Rhaegar, they were in love, or so I've heard. The child they had, the boy, was named Aegon Targaryen. And that is who I am in the eyes of the law. I have proof from Samwell Tarly's research and from Bran's visions. Rhaegar married Lyanna in secret. Their son is legitimate." Sansa pressed a hand to her mouth, eyes flashing with a tumult of emotions, disbelief, anger, compassion, confusion. "Gods, Jon, or should I call you Aegon? I don't know what to say." He reached out, covering her free hand with his own. "I'm still me," he said earnestly. "I was raised at Winterfell. Ned Stark was as much a father to me as anyone could be. You're my sister, no matter what blood flows in my veins. I'm not trying to steal the North from House Stark. If it were up to me, I'd never claim any throne." Sansa trembled, struggling to steady herself. 100 questions must have raced through her mind about what this meant for the North, for their family, for Daenerys, for the rightful claim on the Iron Throne. She inhaled shakily. "Does Daenerys know?" Jon paused. "Not yet." At that, Sansa's blue-gray eyes flared with alarm. "You must tell her. She believes she is the last Targaryen. If she discovers this from someone else or suspects you hid it to undermine her claim, it could destroy any alliance we have. She'll see you as a threat." Jon rubbed his temples. "I know. I've wrestled with the idea of telling her. But I don't want the throne, truly. My only intention is to see peace in the realm." Sansa offered a brittle laugh. "And how many men in history have said that before being swept up in politics, recognized as the rightful heir, and crowned by others whether they wanted it or not?" She shook her head. "We don't always get to choose." Jon let out a heavy sigh. Everything Sansa said aligned with his own fears. He rubbed his tired eyes. "I will tell her," he promised, "when the time is right. For now, keep this between us. If the Northern Lords learn I have a stronger claim than Daenerys, they'll push for you as king," Sansa finished. "And that might lead to conflict or betrayal. Our people are proud, and many of them remain wary of Daenerys. This could tear us apart." She exhaled. "But secrets are dangerous. Be careful, Jon." He nodded, feeling the weight of her words echo in his heart. "Thank you," he said quietly. She squeezed his hand once before releasing it. "You are still my brother," she whispered. "No matter what. Remember that." They parted with heavy hearts, uncertain what shape their future would take. The next day dawned cold and bright. In the courtyard, Unsullied and Northern soldiers trained side by side, an uneasy cooperation that might blossom into something stronger. Dothraki riders stalked the perimeter, complaining of the chill, while wildlings eyed them with curiosity and occasional scorn. Overhead, the dragons soared in a lazy patrol, casting shadows that slid across the snowy battlements. Jon found Daenerys in the godwood. She stood by the ancient weirwood, hands clasped before her. The crimson leaves fluttered in a faint breeze. Sunlight broke through the branches, dappling the snow with patches of pale warmth. She turned when Jon approached, her expression drawn. "Your sister told me how sacred this place is to the Starks," she said softly. He nodded, glancing at the heart tree. "It's special to me too. I prayed here often as a boy." Daenerys searched his face. "You're troubled. I can see it." She paused. "Is it about the Northern Lords?" Sansa still seems reserved. "Yes, she does," Jon replied with a faint grimace. "But she's no longer openly hostile. That's progress. I think she just needs time to see that you mean no harm to the North." His pulse quickened. "I have something I need to tell you, Daenerys. In private." Her brow furrowed. "Then tell me." Jon's mouth went dry. He glanced around the godwood, confirming they were alone, then took a breath. "You know how I've always believed myself Ned Stark's bastard, but my mother was never named? We've spoken of it before. My friend Sam found records in the Citadel. My brother Bran has visions. They learned the truth. My mother was Lyanna Stark. My father was your brother, Prince Rhaegar Targaryen." Daenerys froze, her eyes widening in shock. For a moment, she seemed unable to speak, as if the world had cracked beneath her feet. 1,000 little nuances flared in her gaze: anger, disbelief, confusion, perhaps even betrayal. "Rhaegar?" she whispered at last. But that means you're my nephew, the son of the heir to the Iron Throne. The rightful male heir. If Rhaegar wed Lyanna, you have a stronger claim than I do." Jon grimaced. "So they say. I don't want it. The only reason I'm telling you is because you deserve honesty from me. I meant what I said. I bent the knee because I believe in you. I have no intention of challenging your claim. I never wanted the throne." She took a step back, shaking her head in disbelief. "How can this be true? Rhaegar, he died on the Trident. I know so little of him, only that he was killed by Robert Baratheon. If he had a child with Lyanna Stark, that child should have been hunted down. Why Ned Stark? Of course, he must have hidden you." "That's exactly what happened," Jon said. "Ned sacrificed his honor so Robert wouldn't kill me as an infant. He passed me off as his bastard. And I only learned the truth recently, before we marched on Eastwatch." Daenerys' voice wavered with emotion. "So that was Rhaegar on the battlefield, the man who died saving you. He was resurrected as Melisandre's doing. And he found you, his grown son. Did he know?" Jon exhaled, nodding. "He did. We had a moment before the final fight to speak. I told him. He died soon after, but I think it gave him a measure of peace." Daenerys closed her eyes, absorbing this colossal secret. Her face was a mask of conflicting feelings. Mourning for the brother she never knew, astonishment at Jon's new identity, and a pang of fear for her own claims. "My entire life," she said quietly, "I believed I was the last Targaryen. My brother Viserys raised me to think that only we had the right to sit the Iron Throne. And then I lose Viserys, discover you, the child of Rhaegar, and the line of succession." She trailed off. Jon placed a hand gently on her arm. She did not pull away. "I'm telling you this because I trust you," he repeated. "Not because I aim to overthrow you. I'm still Jon Snow to the men of the North. And in my heart, that's who I've always been." She looked up at him, tears forming in the corners of her violet eyes. "I believe you, Jon, but the realm will not care how you were raised if they learn there's a male Targaryen heir. Some will flock to your banner. Others will see you as a threat to me. This knowledge could spark another war, one we can't afford. We have only just ended the long night." Jon's chest tightened. "What do you propose we do?" Daenerys paused, her gaze drifting to the weirwood tree, as though seeking some ancient wisdom. "We unite. I don't claim to have all the answers, but if the realm sees us as partners, perhaps that can prevent division. Once, Targaryens wedded brother to sister to keep the bloodline pure, but we are not those same people. And yet, if a union would bring peace." Jon flinched, recalling that the idea of aunt and nephew wedding was not wholly taboo for Targaryens, but it was unthinkable for many in the north. He was no pure-blooded Targaryen raised to accept such customs. Still, the notion hung in the air, potent as it was uncomfortable. I can't say what the north would think of that. Daenerys released a trembling breath. It's only one path. There are others, but we must decide soon. Word of your parentage might slip out. If lords sense your claim is stronger, some will push you to take the throne, no matter what you want. Jon thought of Rhaegar, of Ned Stark, of the war they had narrowly avoided. I won't allow the realm to bleed for my sake, he said firmly. If we must unite, we find a way, one that does not tear us apart. She nodded, her expression softening with a swirl of relief and lingering disquiet. Then we proceed carefully. We must keep this secret while we move south. Cersei Lannister still sits on the Iron Throne, and she won't yield it willingly. The realm has enough chaos without learning that Rhaegar's heir stands among us. Jon agreed, though a deep ache formed in his chest at the thought of yet more secrecy. Still, the stakes were too high. If the rumor spread too soon, it could spark unmanageable conflict, especially before confronting Cersei. Unifying the realm under Daenerys' banner was the immediate goal. Everything else could wait if it had to. The next weeks saw renewed preparations for a southern campaign. Winterfell bustled with forging weapons, repairing wagons, and gathering supplies for the Queen's army and the wildlings who chose to march under Jon's lead. Arya vanished at times, returning with reports of Lannister or Frey loyalists near the Neck or rumors from the Trident. Sansa managed the castle's needs, storing enough grain so that if the winter lingered, the small folk would not starve. Bran watched it all with eerie calm, rarely volunteering more than cryptic comments. He seemed to have accepted Jon's revelation in stride. In truth, it was as though he had known all along. At last, the combined forces began their march south. Daenerys flew ahead at times to scout with Drogon and Rhaegar, but she kept them on a tight leash, mindful of the devastation dragons could wreak and how the local lords might react. The winter snows gradually thinned as they crossed the Neck. The temperature warmed enough for the roads to be muddy rather than iced over, though progress remained slow. Along the way, word arrived by Raven of new developments in King's Landing. Cersei Lannister's rule, precarious at the best of times, was under strain. Many had grown disillusioned by her refusal to truly support the war against the White Walkers. The victory at Eastwatch had proven that Daenerys Targaryen had saved the realm from certain doom, while the Lannisters hoarded their forces behind city walls. Some of the Crownland's lords muttered discontent. Yet Cersei held the Red Keep, supported by the remnants of the royal treasury and the infamous loyalty of the City Watch. No one expected her to surrender easily. Eventually, Daenerys' host reached the environs of Moat Cailin, that ancient stronghold guarding the northernmost approach to the south. The battered towers rose from the misty swamp like broken teeth. Jon recalled passing through here when riding to the wall many moons ago, never imagining he would return with an army at his back. The place was largely deserted now, though a token garrison of northern men welcomed them. Here, Daenerys and Jon convened a war council in a half-collapsed hall. By torchlight, they pored over maps of the Trident and the roads that led to the capital. Daenerys' advisors, Tyrion Lannister, newly arrived from White Harbor with a small retinue of loyal men, plus Jorah Mormont and Grey Worm, debated the best route. Tyrion advocated for a slower approach, gathering more allies from the Riverlands who might flock to Daenerys once they saw her triumphant arrival. Jorah, though, thought speed was essential lest Cersei use the time to fortify further or sow treachery among the lords. Grey Worm remained pragmatic, pointing out that the Unsullied fought best on open ground, not bogged in siege. Daenerys listened intently, occasionally exchanging a glance with Jon, who gave his own perspective on how the northern lords might prefer caution over a hasty attack on King's Landing. In the midst of these discussions, a raven arrived bearing sigils of Riverrun. It reported that Edmure Tully, once captive of the Freys, had been freed in the chaos following House Frey's downfall. The Freys themselves had faced slaughter after Arya Stark's vengeance, an event that the realm still whispered of in hushed tones. Edmure was regrouping Tully forces at Riverrun, uncertain of which side to join but remembering that the Targaryens had undone the threat of the dead. Tyrion pointed out that Riverrun was a critical vantage in the Riverlands. If Edmure Tully could be persuaded to bend the knee to Daenerys, it would open a corridor of support. Daenerys decided to dispatch a diplomatic envoy. She sent Tyrion to negotiate along with a small guard. Jon opted to remain with the main force, preparing to march south along the King's Road. They needed to keep the army together in case of trouble, but forging alliances with lords in the Riverlands was crucial to avoid a costly siege on King's Landing. Soon, Tyrion's party set off, promising to meet again near Harrenhal, that ancient ruin by the God's Eye. Harrenhal was a symbol of Targaryen might once, and Daenerys saw a certain poetry in regrouping there. Leaving Moat Cailin behind, the army pressed onward. Day by day, the land grew less frigid, though patches of snow lingered in shaded hollows. Some local lords offered partial support, sending a few knights or wagons of grain, while others hung back, wary of throwing in their lot with a Targaryen queen. The Northmen under Jon's banner remained vigilant, for they were entering terrain they did not fully trust. Sansa and Arya traveled in a caravan near the center, protected by House Stark's loyal guards. Bran rode in a wheeled carriage drawn by a placid horse, rarely speaking unless asked. During that slow trek, Jon and Daenerys found moments of companionship. Their shared secret bound them as much as it strained them. Jon felt his heart twist whenever he looked upon her, this woman who had become friend, ally, and something more. She carried the Targaryen name he had inherited. She had fought beside him against the dead. She was strong, intelligent, compassionate, and yes, sometimes proud. She had the heart of a conqueror, yet seemed drawn to him, the reluctant heir. At times, he wondered if Rhaegar and Lyanna had felt the same mixture of awe and apprehension when they first realized their love broke every rule. Neither openly declared their feelings, but in quiet corners of camp, they spoke of the future. Daenerys recounted her youth in Essos, the day she hatched her dragons, the chain of events that led her across the narrow sea. Jon spoke of growing up in Winterfell as an outsider, the camaraderie he found in the Night's Watch, and the heartbreak of learning his entire life was built on a half-truth. They drew closer, forging a fragile bond that might endure or might shatter under the burdens of the realm. Sometimes they exchanged a kiss behind the draped flap of Daenerys's tent, or a fleeting touch of hands in the hush before dawn. Yet neither felt ready to speak openly of love or marriage, not in the swirling uncertainty of claims and alliances. Eventually, the host neared Harrenhal, that colossal fortress melted by Aegon the Conqueror's dragons centuries past. Its blackened towers jutted skyward like the ribs of a slain beast. Smoke from small fires curled into the sky. Tyrion's retinue was already there, having lit signal pyres for guidance. When Daenerys and Jon arrived, they found Tyrion mid-discussion with Edmure Tully himself, a middle-aged man who bore the weariness of too many captive years. Edmure greeted Daenerys with cautious respect. She heard him out, letting him detail the Riverlands' plight under Frey tyranny and Lannister neglect. Tyrion explained that Edmure had tentatively agreed to pledge House Tully's support to Daenerys in exchange for fair treatment and the restoration of lands that had been stripped under the false rule of House Frey. Daenerys for alliances accepted the terms with grace. They shook hands amid the half-burned courtyard of Harrenhal, forging a new pact. The Tully banners, once held under forced subjugation, would march again, this time with the Dragon Queen and the King in the north. With House Tully in line, the path toward King's Landing became clearer. The plan now was to skirt the eastern shore of the God's Eye, passing near the crossroads inn, where more local forces might join. Then they would move south to the Rosby Road or perhaps strike across open farmland if the weather allowed, aiming to encircle King's Landing from multiple angles. Daenerys's dragons provided air superiority, but she refused to unleash them blindly. She spoke often of not wanting to become another Mad King or to harm innocent small folk. In council meetings, she asked for Jon's counsel and Tyrion's, balancing the unstoppable might of dragons against the moral imperative to avoid unnecessary slaughter. As they advanced, word spread that the Targaryen Queen and the King in the north were approaching the capital. Some whispered that the unstoppable union of fire and ice came to topple the Lannister regime. Others whispered that the realm would see something extraordinary, the last Targaryens united in purpose. Few realized that the truth was even more complicated, for Jon was a Targaryen too, though hidden behind the name Snow. Their forces had swelled to an impressive size by the time they reached the outskirts of King's Landing. Alongside the unsullied and Dothraki Road northern bannermen under Lord Glover and Lady Mormont, the young Lyanna Mormont, as fierce as her name. Riverland's knights under Edmure Tully added a disciplined cavalry. A smattering of Stormland's men had also arrived, presumably chafing under Cersei's rule. They set up a separate camp near the Blackwater Rush, still uncertain whether to fully declare for Daenerys. Jon gazed upon the city from a distant ridge, recalling the last time he had been here. The walls, the sprawl of rooftops, and beyond them, the Red Keep perched over the Blackwater Bay. The sun had come out, painting the sky a dusty gold, but tension thrummed like a drawn bowstring. Cersei would not yield lightly. Rumor had it she had begun stockpiling wildfire in the city, a final, desperate measure to repel invaders. The memory of her previous use of wildfire, blowing up the September of Baelor, still haunted many. If Daenerys attacked rashly, it could end in massacre. The next morning, Daenerys sent riders under a flag of truce, offering parley. A day later, Qyburn, Cersei's maester and twisted confidant, arrived at the Targaryen camp, escorted by the Mountain in blackened armor. The monstrous knight's presence was an unspoken warning of Cersei's brutality. Qyburn delivered a missive, praising the Queen of the Seven Kingdoms, Cersei Lannister, and graciously inviting Daenerys to a meeting in the Dragon Pit, provided she came with only a small escort. Daenerys agreed, seeing no better path to avoid bloodshed. She insisted on bringing Jon and Tyrion. Sansa volunteered as well, but Daenerys gently suggested she remain behind to oversee the camp's security, wary of a trap. And so they rode in a small party to the Dragon Pit, the ancient ruin that once housed Targaryen dragons at the height of their power. Now it stood crumbling on Rhaenys' hill, a shell of old grandeur. Daenerys took Drogon and Rhaegar, circling overhead, while leaving the main host outside the city to discourage any ambush. Jon rode beside her, tension coiled in his gut. Tyrion fidgeted anxiously, muttering about the potential for betrayal. At the gates, the unsullied guards parted for them, and they entered the dusty, echoing space. Cersei waited in a small ring of Lannister soldiers, clad in black and gold. Euron Greyjoy was nowhere in sight, rumored to be off with the Iron Fleet, but Jaime Lannister stood at his sister's side, face set in grim lines. Cersei's cold gaze flicked over Daenerys, then landed on Jon. She raised a brow. Still calling yourself king in the north, bastard? Or have you changed your style now that you've added Targaryen lapdogs to your retinue? Daenerys's jaw tightened. King Jon Snow has my respect, Cersei. And if we're to avoid a siege, I suggest you set aside petty insults. Cersei's lips curved in a humorless smile. A siege? On my city? The last time you approached, you claimed to bring warnings of the dead. That threat is gone, thanks to your own boasts. So why march on the rightful queen of the Seven Kingdoms? Jon stepped forward, speaking carefully. We come to unify the realm, not to bathe it in blood. Your rule has brought only fear and destruction. Even now, your lords desert you. We ask you to surrender the throne to Daenerys Targaryen, who has proven she will fight for this realm's survival. Cersei chuckled, dark amusement dancing in her eyes. Surrender? You have no idea what I have prepared behind these walls, do you? Tyrion cleared his throat, stepping between them. Sister, he said quietly, enough lives have been lost. You know you cannot face two dragons and a unified host from the north and Riverlands. Another wave of Targaryen supporters flows in from the Stormlands as we speak. Even the Iron Bank has shown hesitation in your cause since you failed to repay them fully. He spread his hands. It's over. Her eyes narrowed. Do you imagine I have no allies, Tyrion? There are many who fear Daenerys Targaryen's so-called mercy. They question her heritage, her father's madness, the flames that she unleashed in Slaver's Bay. If I open the gates, we will be at her mercy. No, I will not yield. If you dare to assault this city, you will burn the small folk you claim to protect. Perhaps that's the Targaryen way. Her gaze flicked pointedly to the dragons overhead. Daenerys inhaled sharply, trying to steady herself. I will not harm innocents, she said. I give you my word. But your rule cannot stand. It was taken by deceit and violence. The realm deserves peace. Cersei sneered. You speak of peace at the point of a sword. I have heard enough. If you want my throne, you will have to take it through blood and fire. With that, she turned, summoning her retinue. Jaime hesitated, a flicker of conflict in his eyes. Cersei snarled, Jaime? Reluctantly, he followed. Jon's heart sank as they watched Cersei and her soldiers exit the dragon pit. Tyrion rubbed a hand over his face, grim. So much for negotiations. Daenerys's eyes hardened. She leaves us no choice. If we lay siege, we risk turning King's Landing into a slaughterhouse. But if we withdraw, she'll only strengthen her grip. Jon touched Daenerys's shoulder and she turned to him. We cannot let her win through terror, he said softly. The people in that city don't deserve to be burned or starved. She nodded, biting her lip. I know. We'll have to plan carefully, take the city without destroying it. Her expression was haunted, remembering what her father had almost done with wildfire beneath King's Landing. She would not become Aerys Reborn. They regrouped with their waiting escorts and departed the city. Over the next days, plans were laid. Some urged a swift strike. Drogon and Rhaegar could incinerate the city's defenses, enabling a quick takeover. But Daenerys refused to unleash the dragons upon the crowded streets. Tyrion proposed blockading the city, cutting off supplies, forcing Cersei into a negotiation or internal collapse. However, a protracted siege in winter could lead to countless civilian deaths by starvation. Jon weighed in, suggesting they use the threat of dragons for intimidation while focusing on capturing critical points with minimal collateral damage. If they could seize the main gates or key towers swiftly, the Gold Cloaks might surrender. Jaime Lannister's uncertain loyalty could also be a factor. Tyrion suspected that Jaime no longer fully supported Cersei's madness. Perhaps if confronted with the unstoppable might of Daenerys's army, Jaime would orchestrate a surrender from within. All these possibilities swirled as the Targaryen host encamped outside the city's site, close enough to respond to any aggression. Raven after Raven was dispatched, seeking to encourage lords in the Crownlands to defect. Some did, sending token forces or letters of support. Meanwhile, the mood among the Northern and Riverlands soldiers grew impatient. They had marched all this way, braving winter's horrors, and now they waited on strategy and diplomacy. Sansa from the War Council tent helped coordinate supply lines to ensure the army would not run short of food in the event of a long blockade. As the standstill dragged on, tensions ran high. Daenerys spent hours flying over the outer farmland, letting the city watch her dragons from afar, a show of force. Inside the walls, rumors abounded of the Dragon Queen, who threatened to starve them out. Cersei's propaganda flared, branding Daenerys a foreign invader come to burn them all. Jon worried that the longer they delayed, the more entrenched Cersei's fearmongering would become. Finally, a break in the stalemate arrived in the form of Jaime Lannister himself, who appeared at the Targaryen lines under cover of night. He was ushered into the main council tent, grime coating his cloak, his eyes shadowed with exhaustion. Daenerys regarded him icily. Here was the man who once slew her father. Tyrion hurried to greet him, torn between relief and apprehension. Jaime spoke plainly. Cersei is preparing to use wildfire, placed beneath key districts of the city. If you breach the gates, she'll ignite them, killing thousands, soldiers and small folk alike. She thinks it's better to destroy King's Landing than let it fall to you. He exhaled, shame etched into the lines of his face. I cannot stand by and watch that happen again. I put a sword through the Mad King to stop him from doing the same. I won't let my sister become him. Tyrion pinched the bridge of his nose. Gods, she truly means to burn the city? Jaime nodded, glancing at Daenerys with genuine remorse. You claim you don't want to be your father's daughter in that regard. My sister is now the one spouting madness. Let me help you take the city with minimal bloodshed. I can guide a small force to disarm her caches of wildfire. If you capture the Red Keep swiftly, the Gold Cloaks might surrender. The city can be spared. Daenerys's expression was torn. She despised the name Kingslayer, but here he was, offering a path to save tens of thousands of innocent lives. Jon spoke up quietly. He risked everything to come here. I believe he speaks the truth. Daenerys held Jaime's gaze. Your father's cruelty overshadowed the realm for too many years. Now your sister threatens to unleash the same horror. If I allow you to slip inside the city, how do I know you won't betray me? Jaime's jaw tensed. Because I once broke an oath to do what was right. I'll do it again if I must. I loved my sister, but I love the people of this realm more than I love her madness. Let me prove it. After tense debate among the council, Daenerys relented. Jaime proposed a plan. He would re-enter the city at a lesser-known postern gate along the Blackwater. There, some loyal Lannister guards could be swayed or avoided. He would lead a detachment of Unsullied, who would infiltrate the Red Keep from below, disarm the wildfire caches, and arrest or neutralize the remaining loyalists. Meanwhile, the main Targaryen force would feint at the city gates to distract Cersei's armies. If all went well, the capital might be taken in a single night with minimal bloodshed. The next evening, the plan went into motion. Jaime donned battered armor with no house sigil. Grey Worm led a hand-picked group of Unsullied, each armed lightly for stealth rather than open battle. Tyrion and Daenerys both watched the infiltration party vanish into the darkness, hearts pounding. Jon prepared the main host for the feint, mounting his horse at the front lines. Daenerys took to the skies on Drogon, Rhaegar following close behind, black and green wings slicing through moonlit clouds. They launched a noisy demonstration along the Rosby Road, drums beating, horns blaring. The city's defenders sounded alarms. Jon's men advanced just close enough to draw arrow fire, but not to storm the walls. From above, Daenerys circled, letting loose a few bursts of dragon flame at empty battlements as intimidation. King's Landing shuddered with fear, but no large-scale battle began. Cersei likely wondered what trick Daenerys was playing, but the more time she spent guessing, the better. Beneath the Red Keep, Jaime guided Grey Worm and the Unsullied through narrow corridors. They found one hidden cache of wildfire near the dungeons, guarded by a handful of men. A brief clash ensued, steel flashing in the torchlight, but the Unsullied swiftly overpowered them. Jaime directed them to extinguish the fuses and dismantle the casks. Another cache lay near the Great September's ruins, an ironically grim reflection of the previous explosion Cersei had unleashed. Jaime's knowledge of the keep's secret passages led them around patrols, disarming each stash of wildfire in turn. Yet time was short. Cersei had watchers on the walls, and by now she might suspect infiltration. Indeed, just as the Unsullied finished sealing the last cache, an alarm clanged from deeper in the fortress. Jaime cursed, motioning for them to hurry. They raced through twisting hallways, heading for the throne room. The plan was to capture Cersei alive, forcing a swift surrender. Soldiers loyal to Cersei emerged in small clusters. The Unsullied fought with quiet precision, cutting them down or forcing them to yield. The gilded corridors echoed with the ring of steel, shouts, and the pounding of boots. Outside, the clamor at the city gates intensified. Jon feigned an assault, ramming at one of the lesser gates, drawing defenders away from the Red Keep. Above, Drogon and Rhaegar roared, bathing sections of wall in flame, forcing archers to flee. Yet the main gate remained closed. No sign of a general surrender. The tension built. Would Jaime succeed, or would Cersei unleash some secret reservoir of wildfire? At last, Jaime burst into the throne room with Grey Worm and his Unsullied at his heels. Cersei stood at the foot of the Iron Throne, flanked by Qyburn and the Mountain. A ring of Lannister guards formed a shaky perimeter. Torchlight flickered on the ancient swords that formed the seat of kings. Cersei's face twisted with fury at the sight of Jaime among her enemies. "Traitor!" she spat. Jaime faced her, sword drawn, golden hand glinting. "It ends tonight, Cersei. Surrender the throne. The city is lost." Qyburn started to protest, but Grey Worm hurled a spear that pierced the maester's chest. He toppled instantly lifeless. The Mountain roared, lumbering forward, but Jaime stepped between him and Grey Worm. "Go," Jaime rasped to the Unsullied, "secure Cersei." They sprang, flanking the monstrous knight. The Mountain swung his gargantuan sword, felling 2 Unsullied with a single blow. Grey Worm attacked from behind, burying a spear in the giant's back. The Mountain hissed, unfeeling, and spun to crush Grey Worm. Jaime thrust his sword into the gaps of the undead knight's armor. The creature staggered. Then, with a final combined effort, the Unsullied battered him down, each strike precise, until the Mountain finally collapsed, motionless. Blood pooled, black and viscous, across the marble floor. Cersei stood trembling, eyes darting in search of an escape. Yet the Red Keep corridors behind her were now filled with Unsullied, more approaching every moment. She clutched at the folds of her dark gown. "Jaime, please," she whispered, voice raw, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Don't do this. We can still lay." He shook his head, heartbreak etched on his face. "We can't, Cersei. You would burn the city rather than yield. I can't let it happen." Slowly, he raised his sword, pointing it toward her. The Lannister guards, seeing the monstrous mountain fallen, dropped their weapons in surrender. Silence fell, broken only by Cersei's ragged sob. Grey Worm motioned and 2 Unsullied seized Cersei's arms, restraining her. She glared at Jaime with a mixture of betrayal and loathing. "You killed father, you killed everything we built." Jaime swallowed, tears shimmering in his own eyes. "I'm sorry," he murmured. Then he gestured for Grey Worm to take her away. She screamed curses as they led her out, the last queen of the Lannister line undone by her own brother's defiance. When the dawn broke, word rippled through the city. Cersei was captured, the wildfire caches disarmed, the Red Keep seized by Daenerys's forces. The bells of King's Landing began to toll, not in horror, but in surrender. Jon's host at the gates paused, hearing that echo of finality. The city watch, the gold cloaks, threw open the gates and laid down their weapons. Civilians spilled into the streets, both in fear and relief. Daenerys landed Drogon in the courtyard of the Red Keep, flanked by Rhaegar, a living testament to Targaryen might. Her banners soon flew atop the ramparts, a sight not seen in the capital for many decades. Jon, Tyrion, and other leaders filed in, greeted by the Unsullied salute. Jaime stood apart, battered and haunted. He had done what he believed was right, but he had destroyed his sister in the process. Daenerys, upon seeing him, inclined her head. "You have my thanks," she said quietly. "We have spared many lives this day, thanks to your choice." Jaime only nodded, too spent for words. Tyrion laid a hand on his brother's shoulder, offering unspoken sympathy. All throughout the city, the small folk peered from windows or doorways, uncertain whether to fear or celebrate. Daenerys strove to reassure them, ordering her troops to maintain order and avoid any looting or violence. She commanded that bread and ale be distributed at public squares. Gradually, the people began to venture out. Some knelt in awe before the dragons. Others tested the new regime's generosity, seeking safety or employment. The stench of fear lingered, but hope glimmered that this might not be a repeat of the last sack of King's Landing. Within the Red Keep, Daenerys claimed the throne room. The Iron Throne stood before her, silent in its ancient menace. She stepped up to it, placing a hand on the cold steel. Once she had dreamed of this moment as a child in exile, the rightful Targaryen reclaiming her birthright. Now it felt heavier than she had imagined. Thousands of lives, entire kingdoms, the weight of every sacrifice, her advisors, her armies, her dragons, her own nephew who had a better claim. She sank onto the throne, the metal cool beneath her. The hall was nearly empty. Most had gone to secure the city or rest from the ordeal. Jon lingered near the steps, gaze somber, while Tyrion stood to one side. As Daenerys sat, she closed her eyes briefly, remembering Khal Drogo, Ser Barristan, Yora's unwavering loyalty, Missandei's friendship. All the ghosts who had helped her get here. She opened her eyes, finding Jon watching her quietly. "You've done it," he said, voice hushed. "The city is yours." She nodded, shoulders tight. "But at what cost? And is it truly mine, or does it belong to us all?" Jon stepped forward. "I pledged myself to you, Daenerys. You are queen of the 7 kingdoms. You freed the slaves of Astapor, Yukai Meereen. You saved the North from the dead. And now you have taken King's Landing without raising it. That is worth something." She gave a faint, tremulous smile. "Yes," she murmured. "It is worth everything." Tyrion cleared his throat gently. "Your grace, there will be formalities to handle, lords to appease, sentencing for Cersei and her supporters, ensuring food for the winter. But for now, the city must see your mercy. Let them witness you not as a conqueror, but a protector." Daenerys exhaled. "You're right. Tomorrow, we'll hold a gathering in the throne room, invite the people to witness justice for the Lannister queen. We must show them that a new era has begun." She glanced at Jon, unspoken understanding passing between them. This was only the beginning of the challenge. Ruling, after all, was more difficult than conquering. That night, the camp outside the city was dismantled. Soldiers moved into the barracks. The Northmen found lodging in the old manors near the walls, while the Dothraki and Unsullied set up their own quarters. The dragons perched on the city's outer towers, warily eyeing the bustle below. Ravens flew out to every corner of Westeros, announcing that Daenerys Targaryen had claimed King's Landing with minimal bloodshed and that Cersei Lannister was in custody. The realm braced for the next shift. Was this truly peace, or simply another lull before the next storm? In the Red Keep's dungeons, Cersei languished in a dim cell, her regal clothes soiled, hair tangled. She stared at the walls with vacant fury, refusing to speak to the guards. Jaime visited once, only to find her glaring in hatred. She called him a traitor, spitting at his feet. The next day, the summons came for her to appear before Daenerys Targaryen in the throne room, her fate to be decided before the gathered court. And so the hall filled once more. Sansa and Arya arrived from the outskirts of the city wearing their Stark sigils with pride. Bran joined them, silent in his wheelchair. Edmure Tully stood with his retinue while the newly pledged Stormlands Knights formed a solemn row to observe. Tormund Giantsbane, out of place in a courtly setting, hovered near the back, arms crossed, face set in faint disapproval of all this formality. The Unsullied guarded the dais, spears upright. Tyrion waited at Daenerys' right hand and Jon at her left, both wearing expressions of cool resolve. Daenerys sat upon the Iron Throne. The hush was profound as Cersei was led in, manacles clinking, eyes blazing. She refused to bend the knee, standing defiantly despite her disheveled appearance. Tyrion stepped forward, voice carrying. Cersei of House Lannister stands accused of regicide, treason against the realm, and the planned destruction of King's Landing via wildfire. Does she deny these charges? Cersei's lips curled. I deny nothing. I would have burned the city before letting it fall to another Targaryen tyrant. A murmur swept through the hall. Daenerys regarded the prisoner with a steady gaze. You condemned thousands to death for your pride. You would have unleashed horrors upon innocents to keep your power. By all rights, the law demands your life. Cersei laughed, a bitter sound. Then take it. Or is the breaker of chains too noble to execute me? Your father would have done it without pause. Daenerys' knuckles whitened on the arms of the throne. She trembled with the weight of that decision and perhaps with the temptation to exact vengeance for her father and the ruin the Lannisters had caused. But she glanced at Jon, who gave her a solemn, encouraging nod. Slowly, Daenerys rose. Cersei Lannister, for your crimes against the realm, you are hereby stripped of all titles. Your family's lands and holdings shall be forfeit. And for your attempt to burn King's Landing, you deserve death. Yet I will not repeat the cycle of vengeance that has plagued Westeros. I sentence you to a life of imprisonment across the Narrow Sea in the same style of cells you once used to hold your enemies. Cersei's eyes widened as though she had not expected mercy. The crowd stirred in surprise, some outraged that she would not be executed, others relieved to see a new brand of justice. Daenerys continued, You will live out your days in a prison far from these shores, never to return to Westeros. If you attempt escape, you forfeit any mercy I have shown. A swirl of murmurs broke out. Cersei's face twisted in a mix of fear and loathing. She spat, cowered, but her voice wavered. Grey Worm and the guards seized her arms again, dragging her from the hall. One of the Stormlands Knights, emboldened, called out that the Queen should show no mercy to traitors, but Daenerys silenced him with a glare. Mercy, she said firmly, is what sets us apart from tyranny. The sentence was passed. In days to come, Cersei was escorted onto a ship bound for Essos, heavily guarded. Jaime, despite everything, could not bring himself to watch her final departure. He remained in King's Landing, uncertain of his future. Tyrion quietly approved of Daenerys' verdict, though he wondered if letting Cersei live might sow trouble one day. Jon said nothing, but privately he admired Daenerys' restraint. With the capital secured, Daenerys turned her efforts to restoring order. She named Tyrion her hand, charging him with reorganizing the city's governance, ensuring that taxes were fair and that the City Watch served the crown, not a personal vendetta. She summoned lords from across the Crownlands, inviting them to affirm their loyalty in exchange for renewed prosperity. Edmure Tully was granted official recognition of his rule in the Riverlands, while some Stormlands lords asked to be recognized too. Daenerys began forming a small council, pulling from diverse regions. Her aim was to unify, not to dominate. Still, the question of the North loomed. Many northern bannermen had followed Jon, not Daenerys, and Sansa Stark had served as Lady of Winterfell with a competence that made some wonder if the North should remain independent. Others pointed out that Jon had bent the knee and the Old Kingdom was no more. In the midst of these uncertainties, a meeting was called in the Red Keep Solar with Daenerys, Jon, Sansa, Arya, Bran, Tyrion, Davos, and a handful of other key figures. The windows overlooked the city rooftops, red in the late afternoon sun. Daenerys addressed Sansa with a diplomatic tone. You have done much for the realm, Lady Stark. Winterfell stands as a crucial bulwark in the north. I hope we can find a way to integrate your leadership without undermining the unity we've built. Sansa pressed her lips together. The North is grateful for your help against the Night King. However, my people are proud. They have chosen Jon as king in the North. This entire arrangement was predicated on him bending the knee to save them from the dead. That threat is gone. Daenerys nodded, turning to Jon. What would you have me do? I cannot dismember the realm. Yet I see the North's desire for autonomy. Jon glanced at Sansa. He knew she wanted independence. He also knew that as a Targaryen, though few in this room realized he was the true heir, he had sworn to help Daenerys unify the Seven Kingdoms. Torn, he said, the North has always been different from the southern kingdoms. Perhaps we can formalize a new agreement that grants the North greater self-governance while recognizing the crown's suzerainty. Sansa raised a brow. Meaning we remain part of the realm, but rule ourselves in most matters? That might appease some of our bannermen. Yet they crowned you king, Jon. He exhaled. Titles matter less to me than protecting our people. If we can ensure Winterfell's freedoms and traditions are honored under Daenerys' reign, is that not enough? A hush. Daenerys thought it over, glancing at Tyrion, who considered the possibility. A North that is part of the realm yet retains some measure of autonomy could be beneficial, Tyrion ventured. Similar to how the Iron Islands once had certain privileges, though that arrangement was fraught given the Greyjoy rebellions. We would need to outline specifics, of course. Sansa studied them both. If that is what Jon desires, I will not stand in the way. Jon managed a faint, thankful smile. Relief flickered in Daenerys' eyes. She extended a hand to Sansa across the table. Then let us draft a formal document, ensuring the North's self-governance while pledging mutual defense and loyalty. The details can be hammered out with the rest of the realm's lords, but your voice will carry great weight. House Stark's loyalty is not something I take lightly. Sansa clasped Daenerys' hand in a gesture of agreement, albeit with lingering reservation. A small step, but a vital one toward forging peace. And so the realm began a new chapter. Lannister forces, leaderless without Cersei, either melted away or pledged loyalty to the throne under Tyrion's stewardship. Lords from Dorne arrived, curious about this new Targaryen queen who saved the realm from the undead. Gendry, the last known Baratheon blood relative, if only by bastardy, emerged from the Stormlands and was recognized by Daenerys, forging yet another tie. The seeds of a stable monarchy began to form, watered by the blood that had been spilled and the mercy that had been shown. All the while, Jon and Daenerys carried their secret. That Jon, not Daenerys, was the senior Targaryen heir. In quiet corridors, they wrestled with its implications. Jon loathed the idea of overshadowing Daenerys' claim, and Daenerys feared that if the realm discovered his heritage, it might rally behind him. Yet as they navigated the complexities of ruling, they grew closer, forging a bond deeper than mere alliance. Over time, their stolen kisses and whispered confessions became a shared understanding that perhaps, together, they could break the wheel without succumbing to the darkness that had plagued Targaryen history. In the months that followed, harvest wagons rolled north and south, roads were rebuilt, and a new spirit of cooperation blossomed. Winter might linger for a while yet, but the terror of the long night and the tyranny of unrestrained queens or kings felt more distant. At Winterfell, Sansa presided over a revitalized castle, taking pride in the fact that the North was not being oppressed by southern swords. Arya wandered, restless, but made frequent stops at home, ensuring that those she cared for remained safe. Bran, in his own inscrutable way, watched over all from a vantage beyond time. At King's Landing, Daenerys and Jon oversaw the small council with Tyrion, Davos, Grey Worm, and a collection of lords representing each region. Davos proved adept at negotiating trade routes, thanks to his smuggling expertise. Tyrion orchestrated tax reforms that aimed to mend the damage done by previous misrule. Jaime lingered in the capital, no longer welcome by some, but quietly assisting Tyrion with matters of security. He trained new recruits to the City Watch, hoping to instill loyalty to justice rather than to a single ruler. One evening, after a long council session, Jon accompanied Daenerys to a balcony overlooking Blackwater Bay. The moon's light shimmered on the water, and the scent of salt drifted on a gentle breeze. Daenerys leaned against the railing, arms folded. "Do you ever think about what your father, Rhaegar, might have done if he'd won the war?" she asked softly. Jon came to stand beside her. Sometimes, from what I've heard, he was gentle, thoughtful. He believed in prophecy, in a prince who was promised. He never wanted the slaughter that tore the realm apart. She nodded, eyes distant. Yet prophecy can twist even noble intentions. I've learned that from Essos to Westeros. A wistful smile touched her lips. If we have truly broken the cycle of war, perhaps we honor Rhaegar and all those who came before us. Jon slipped an arm around her shoulders, and she leaned into him. They stood in silence for a time, listening to the soft lap of waves. Then Jon ventured, "We've avoided telling the realm the truth about me. Do you think we'll keep that secret forever? She closed her eyes. Perhaps not forever. But for now, the realm sees one Targaryen queen, not a contested claim. We have peace, fragile but real. If you were revealed as Rhaegar's son, half the lords might demand you take the throne. Even if you refused, then everything we've built could collapse. Jon sighed. That was my fear as well. My father, Ned Stark, he taught me that lies can protect, but they can also fester. Still, maybe this lie is the lesser evil. She reached up, placing a hand against his chest. You have a good heart, Jon Snow. Aegon Targaryen. Whatever name you bear, you are the man who helped save this realm. That is enough for me. He cupped her face, gazing into her eyes. The weight of their responsibilities momentarily slipped away, leaving only the truth of their companionship, forged in ice and fire. He kissed her, gently, a promise that whatever burdens they carried, they would face them together. Below them, in the winding streets of King's Landing, people were settling into a new dawn, one without the shadow of endless war or the terror of the undead. Far across the realm, in craggy castles and wide plains, in the snows of Winterfell and the deserts of Dorne, men and women dared hope that this time, the dragon's return would herald renewal, not devastation. And in the blackness of the night sky, the stars shimmered like distant torches, silent witnesses to a story that had begun long ago with a crown of rubies on the trident, a stolen Stark girl, and a prophecy about a prince that was promised. Now that story found a new path. The living had triumphed over the dead. The wheel of conquest might yet be broken by mercy and unity. And though Rhaegar Targaryen could not stand beside them, his legacy endured in the son he had known only briefly, and in the queen who carried the Targaryen flame forward. In time, ballads would be sung of how Melisandre revived Rhaegar Targaryen to fight beside Jon Snow against the Night King, of how father and son found each other in a final stand at Eastwatch by the sea. Some would say their shared blood ushered in a new age of peace and prosperity. Others would debate whether prophecies truly mattered, or if mortal choices shaped the realm's destiny. But the truth, as ever, lay in the hearts of those who strove, who suffered, who chose compassion over cruelty, even when the easier path beckoned. Thus did the fate of Westeros turn upon the crimson embers of a pyre and the promise of dawn. And though sorrow lingered for the dead who would never see the realm reborn, hope stirred in the living. Winter receded, inch by inch, and spring promised that even the coldest darkness could yield to the warmth of second chances. The morning after Cersei Lannister's banishment dawned gray and cool over King's Landing. Clouds hung over the city in a low, somber canopy as though the sky itself still grappled with the upheaval that had overtaken the realm. The sea breeze carried scents of salt and smoke drifting across the Blackwater Bay and through the partially ruined gates. Much work lay ahead, battered walls needed repair, half the city's warehouses stood empty of grain, and the scars left by Cersei's regime still lingered in the hearts of the populace. Daenerys Targaryen emerged onto a balcony overlooking the training yard, dressed in a simple black gown. The clasp at her throat bore the three-headed dragon sigil of her house. Months had passed since her peaceful takeover of the city, months marked by endless negotiations, policy decisions, and attempts to mend what had been broken. She felt every moment of it weighing on her. The bells of the Great September might no longer ring with the same clarity, the structure itself a charred memory of Cersei's final outrages, yet the old city was slowly coming back to life. Down below, Unsullied drilled in orderly rows. Under Grey Worm's direction, they practiced maneuvers to keep them battle-ready, though the greatest wars were, she prayed, behind them. Beyond them, Dothraki warriors stabled their horses, uneasy in the confines of city walls but understanding that their queen wanted them near until the realm was truly settled. At the far end of the yard, men-at-arms wearing a mix of northern, riverlands, and newly repainted royal surcoats sparred with wooden swords. Daenerys could sense the friction between them. Unity was an ongoing work, not a completed fact. She looked out at the city sprawl, battered rooftops, alleyways still full of rubble, markets tentatively reopening. During the siege that never was, she had prevented a wholesale assault, but the tension and fear had led many residents to flee, leaving entire neighborhoods abandoned. Now they returned in trickles, families hauling battered carts, caged chickens squawking. Daenerys had established relief stations, distributing bread and porridge to the needy. It was not enough, but it was a start. She touched the cold stone railing, letting out a slow exhale. Today, she would hold court in the throne room, hearing petitions from lords and commoners alike. Each day brought challenges: a rebellious band of Lannister loyalists here, a dispute over farmland in the Reach there, rumors of slavers trying to smuggle goods through the stepstones. At night, she collapsed into bed with a weariness that had nothing to do with swords or dragons. Ruling was a constant balancing act, made more complex by the swirling truth about Jon Snow. He approached her now, boots echoing on the stone. She turned and offered a small smile. Though dressed in black leather and a fur-trimmed cloak, he still looked more Stark than Targaryen, more north than south. Yet she saw that same quiet resolve in him that had carried them through the dead of winter. She remembered how they had stood together on the battlements of Winterfell, how they had defied the Night King, how they had lost Rhaegar after only a brief reunion. So much had transpired since then, forging a bond between them that was deeper than titles. He came to stand beside her. "You're up early," he said. "Have you slept at all?" She gave a weary laugh. "An hour, perhaps two. My mind won't quiet. We have a new crisis brewing in the West, lords grumbling about taxes, refusing to send men. They claim they're overburdened. And the city's watch needs better pay to stave off corruption. It never ends." Jon nodded. "No, it doesn't." He glanced downward at the yard, then at the spires of the Red Keep. "We used to think the war against the dead would be the hardest part. But maybe rebuilding is the greater task." She slipped an arm through his, an intimate gesture they allowed themselves in moments of solitude. Their closeness was still a whispered thing, though not entirely hidden. It was not flaunted, either. Rumors circulated that the king in the north and the Dragon Queen were lovers, but no official declaration had been made. Given the complexities of Jon's parentage, they had chosen caution. Even so, in private, they allowed themselves these quiet shows of affection. "We'll manage," she said softly. "We have to. Once you told me we can't let the realm bleed for our sake. We won't. We'll find a path." He lowered his gaze. "About that, I've received a letter from Winterfell." His jaw tightened. "Sansa says the lords in the north are uneasy about my long absence. They gave me their loyalty, some grudgingly, some with genuine trust, but they remain wary of the capital. They fear the north is losing its voice under Targaryen rule." Daenerys angled her head, reading the concern in his eyes. "Do they demand you return and stand apart from me?" He hesitated. "Not in so many words. But they want to see me, to hear assurances from my mouth. They want to know what arrangement we've made with you, how their interests will be represented in this new government." She pursed her lips. "We promised the autonomy in local matters, so long as they honor the crown in matters of foreign policy and trade. But I can see how they might feel overshadowed. You are their chosen king in the north, and yet you've spent these months in King's Landing." He touched the back of her hand lightly. "Because I believe in what you're trying to build here. But perhaps we should travel north together. Show the lords that I remain committed to Winterfell and that you respect their needs." Daenerys' eyes flickered with interest. She had not left the capital since the day it surrendered. In that time, new alliances had been forged, new roads built. But King's Landing was not the whole realm. "If we go north, we leave behind many pressing matters," she said. "Though Tyrion can handle the day-to-day tasks for a while. And if we show them our unity in the north, it might ease their fears." "I agree we should go." Jon's relief was evident. "Then we'll arrange a royal progress or something like it. We can bring the dragons, a small retinue. You'll see how the north recovers from the war against the dead." She allowed a small grin. "I've not forgotten the cold, but I look forward to seeing Winterfell with you at my side, this time as your ally and more than an ally." They stood there a moment longer, letting the prospect of the journey soothe their anxieties. Then a messenger approached, bowing low and announcing that the queen's presence was requested in the throne room. Dawn had barely broken, yet the business of rule could not wait. Exchanging one last, affectionate glance, they proceeded inside to resume their day. The throne room was crowded with petitioners when Daenerys arrived. The Iron Throne rose behind her, a forbidding shape of melted swords and old secrets. She seated herself carefully, face set in a regal calm. To her right stood Tyrion Lannister, her hand wearing a measured expression. To her left, close but slightly behind, stood Melisandre's replacement as the queen's translator and secretary, a Myrinese scribe named Naharis, who spoke with a soft accent but possessed a keen mind for record-keeping. Grey Worm took his usual place near the base of the steps, unspeaking but watchful. The morning's business concerned everything from shipping routes to the stepstones, to grain storage in the city, to arguments over which house should hold custody of certain crownlands now that House Lannister's direct control was gone. Daenerys issued calm judgments, accepting the advice of Tyrion when needed. She strove for fairness, hoping the city's people would see that her brand of rule did not follow Cersei's cruelty nor her father's madness. By midday, she was weary, yet one more petitioner stepped forward, drawing her attention. He was a broad-shouldered man clad in dusty leathers, a sigil of a golden rose pinned to his cloak, the emblem of House Tyrell, though that line was all but ended. He bowed stiffly. "Your Grace, my name is Ser Harwin of the Reach," he announced. "I speak for several lesser lords who once served House Tyrell. With no Tyrell heirs left living, we beseech the crown to settle the future of Highgarden." A ripple of murmurs passed through the onlookers. Highgarden had fallen to the Lannisters during the war, stripped of its wealth. Then the Lannisters themselves lost power, leaving Highgarden in a sort of legal limbo. The gold from its vaults had funded Cersei's short-lived expansions, and the castle had partially emptied. Now lesser lords jostled to claim it, or at least to ask that the queen appoint a caretaker. Daenerys rested her hands on her lap, expression turning pensive. House Tyrell had been extinguished when Olenna Tyrell took her own life rather than surrender to the Lannisters. Yet the seat remained, a proud fortress in a fertile land. Assigning it to someone new would shape the future of the Reach for generations. Tyrion spoke softly into Daenerys' ear. "Several houses have laid claim. House Tarly might have, had they not turned against their own lord. Yet Samwell Tarly is in the Night's Watch, or was. Another line could be Karen or even Redwine if they want a new seat. We must be careful not to spark a regional feud." She nodded. "Indeed. Ser Harwin, you say you represent multiple lesser lords of the Reach. Do you propose a single candidate to hold Highgarden, or do you bring multiple claims?" He cleared his throat. "Some propose a council to rule in the name of the crown. Others want a single ruler. We humbly ask your Grace's guidance." Daenerys glanced at Jon, who had come to stand in the hall after finishing a short meeting outside. He wore his stark furs, arms crossed, clearly listening. Their eyes met, and she saw him give the slightest nod, encouraging her to handle it with fairness. She turned back to Ser Harwin. "Highgarden is too important to remain neglected. The fields around it feed much of Westeros. I will consider a temporary wardship, a caretaker who will oversee planting, harvest, and trade, while the local lords hammer out a more permanent arrangement. Return tomorrow, Ser Harwin. By then I'll have a proposal." He bowed with obvious relief. "Thank you, Your Grace." He stepped back, and with that, the day's petitions came to an end. Servants started ushering people from the hall, leaving Daenerys, Tyrion, Jon, and a few loyal guards. Tyrion exhaled heavily, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Highgarden is only one piece of the puzzle. We've outstanding disputes in the Stormlands, the Vale, and even the Iron Islands." A sour twist came to his lips. "Yara Greyjoy is nominally your ally, yet her hold on the Iron Islands is far from absolute. Some of Euron's supporters remain, raiding coastal villages. We have trouble enough at sea, never mind the stepstones where Sell Sails claim the waters for themselves." Jon cleared his throat. "All the more reason we should see to the north soon," he said. "Then we can shift our focus outward, ensuring our borders are secure." Daenerys listened, thoughtful. "We'll journey north within the fortnight. Tyrion, you'll remain as hand, overseeing the city in my absence. Grey Worm, I trust you to keep order but maintain fairness. Any sign of revolt must be handled swiftly yet justly. No more random burnings, no shows of terror. We must demonstrate that the city can trust us." Grey Worm offered a crisp nod. "Yes, Your Grace." Tyrion agreed as well, though a flicker of unease crossed his face. "I'll do my best. But you two traveling together, both the Queen of the Seven Kingdoms and the King in the North, might leave the capital feeling fatherless, for lack of a better word." Daenerys gave him a wry smile. "That's why I leave you here, Lord Tyrion. Guide them well. You've proven more than capable." He touched his chest in mock gratitude. "It seems I can't escape responsibility no matter how hard I try. So be it." That night, plans took shape. Daenerys wrote orders specifying that a small retinue would accompany her, a handful of Unsullied for security, a few Dothraki outriders who pined to ride beyond city walls, and a selection of stewards. Jon would bring a half-dozen northern guards to ensure no one in the north felt overshadowed by the Queen's presence. For her part, Daenerys intended to bring Rhaegar and Drogon. She was loath to leave her dragons behind in King's Landing where she could not watch them. They had roost in the city's outskirts, occasionally gliding over the Blackwater, but they belonged to open skies. She believed a flight to the north might do them good. As the days passed, wagons were loaded with supplies for the journey. Daenerys made final pronouncements regarding the city's governance. She named a temporary steward to handle the Crownland's farmland claims. She ensured that bread and coin were set aside for the city's poorest districts. Tyrion fussed over every detail, double-checking that no unscrupulous merchant might hoard resources. All the while, the rumor spread that the queen was traveling to the north. Some city dwellers were relieved fewer dragons overhead, perhaps. Others were nervous that the city might fall into old patterns without her presence. In truth, no one quite knew what to expect. This was not the brutal Targaryen rule of old nor the cunning oppression of the Lannisters. It was something new. At last, the day of departure arrived. Grey Worm and Tyrion stood by as Daenerys and Jon made their farewells. The Unsullied parted ranks in a silent salute, spears angled in perfect precision. Dothraki riders, about 20 in all, waited astride their horses, scanning the city's gates impatiently. Servants loaded the final crates onto wagons. Daenerys wore a riding dress of thick gray cloth, lined with fur at the collar for the cold she knew she would face. Jon, for his part, was clad in heavier northern garb, though the southern sun still clung to the city. Daenerys embraced Tyrion briefly. "Take care of them," she said. "And take care of yourself." He bowed. "I will, Your Grace. Be safe and try not to win every argument in the north. Some fights are better left alone." She laughed. "I'll keep that in mind." Then she turned to Grey Worm. "Hold the city. Show them we aren't the monsters they feared." Grey Worm inclined his head. "Your orders will be followed." Nearby, a stable-boy led 2 horses forward for Daenerys and Jon. Daenerys paused, turning to look for her dragons. Drogon perched on a half-ruined tower, wings folded, while Rhaegar roost on a nearby rooftop. She whistled softly, a signal they recognized. Drogon rumbled, unfolding his leathery wings, and took flight in a gust of air that sent dust swirling. Rhaegar followed. Citizens gasped at the sight of both dragons spiraling above in the bright morning light, casting massive shadows on the Red Keep's courtyard. Once, that spectacle would have provoked terror. Now it evoked a strange wonder. The queen and her dragons were leaving. Would they return triumphant, or would something else befall the realm? Jon helped Daenerys mount her horse, then swung up onto his own. Together, they guided their steeds toward the city gates, the small entourage in tow. The winding streets of King's Landing were quieter than usual, with many shutting windows or bowing from doorsteps. The Dothraki riders hooped occasionally to stir their horses, ignoring the wary glances of the city watch. Daenerys and Jon rode side by side, exchanging small smiles when eyes met. There was a thrill in this, an open road after months of stifling decisions. They passed through the gate, out onto the King's Road. Once clear of the outer suburbs, Daenerys gave a nod to Jon, then spurred her horse into a canter. The group followed, the dragons overhead keeping pace with slow, measured wing beats. The capital receded behind them, a jumble of walls and towers eventually lost in the distance. Ahead stretched leagues of farmland, dotted with villages that had known war, famine, and fear. Some fields showed the green beginnings of new growth, coaxed by the earliest hints of spring. Others lay fallow, their peasants lacking the means to plant anew. The journey north was not a quick one. For Daenerys, it offered a glimpse of the land she now ruled. At each village, they saw how the war had left scars, burned barns, orphans begging by the roadside. She dismounted often to speak with the small folk, offering words of reassurance, inquiring after their harvests. Many gazed at her in awe. A queen had never stooped to speak with them directly. Jon stood by, lending quiet support. Whenever the conversation turned to northern independence or rumored taxes, he calmly explained that they sought to unify the realm without crushing local traditions. Skepticism was common, but a faint sense of hope slowly emerged among the people who recognized that the Dragon Queen's retinue had not come to pillage or demand cruel tithes. The presence of the dragons overhead had its own effect. Their shadows rippled across farmland, stirring equal parts fear and fascination. But Daenerys kept Drogon and Rhaegar from setting foot near towns to avoid unintentional destruction. She made sure they hunted game in the wild, away from livestock. At night, the dragons curled in open meadows or on low hills, watchful of intruders. They seemed calmer now that they had left King's Landing. Sometimes Daenerys flew on Drogon's back to scout the road ahead, while Rhaegar soared beside her in silent companionship. On the 9th day, they reached the Riverlands. Edmure Tully had promised them safe passage, and indeed they encountered a small band of Tully outriders who guided them to a campsite near a tributary of the Trident. The land here was still recovering from the effects of the war, but fields showed promise. Edmure himself had traveled south recently to meet with Tyrion, so they did not see him. Instead, they continued onward. Sansa had sent word that she would meet them at the Twins, that once infamous crossing where the Freys had ruled and the Red Wedding had stained the land with betrayal. Arriving at the Twins near dusk, Daenerys felt a chill run down her spine. She had heard the stories how the Freys turned on the Starks under Walder Frey's cunning watch, how they slaughtered guests under the guise of hospitality. Now House Frey was a ruin, Walder and his immediate kin systematically killed by Arya Stark's vengeance. The fortress overshadowing the crossing was in disrepair, the gates partly caved. A small garrison of men loyal to Edmure Tully held it, more out of necessity than desire, ensuring travelers could still cross the river. Tents were pitched outside, and Daenerys recognized the Stark banner of the dire wolf among them. Her heart lifted at the sight. She and Jon rode in, greeted by northern soldiers with respectful nods. At the center of the camp, Sansa Stark emerged from a large pavilion. She wore a heavier cloak than usual, the northern wind biting even here. Behind her stood Arya, a slim figure with unsettlingly keen eyes, and Bran in his wheeled chair. When Sansa saw Jon dismount, her expression softened. She moved to embrace him. "You took long enough, Jon," Sansa said with a faint teasing note, stepping back to examine him. "I worried King's Landing had swallowed you up." Jon smiled. "We stopped in every village we passed, but we are here now." "Sansa, it's good to see you." He glanced at Daenerys, who had dismounted and come to stand beside him. "The Queen has come as well." Sansa turned her gaze to Daenerys. Her posture was poised, betraying the quiet confidence she had learned in the trials of her life. "Your Grace, welcome to the North. Well, nearly the North," she said softly. "We're still in the Riverlands, but we'll call it close enough." Daenerys inclined her head. "Thank you, Lady Stark. I appreciate your hospitality. The road has been enlightening." Arya approached with that light-footed grace. She looked at Daenerys briefly, then at Jon. "The men talk of dragons overhead. I suppose that's you?" Daenerys let out a half-smile. "Yes. My children remain outside the camp, though. I'd not subject your men to a scare." Her tone was amiable. She knew Arya was the most guarded of the Starks when it came to outsiders, especially Targaryens. But she sensed no open hostility, only watchfulness. Arya gave a small nod. Probably for the best. The smell of dragon might ruin a good meal. She said it with an offhand dryness that bordered on humor. Bran was wheeled closer by a servant. His gaze rested on Daenerys, a distant look as though seeing more than just the present. "Welcome," he murmured. "Everything we do now is a new beginning. The old has passed." She found his words curious but simply answered, "Thank you. I hope we can forge a peaceful path." They spent the evening in that camp, preparing for the final stretch toward Winterfell. Sansa had brought casks of northern ale and honeyed bread, and the small gathering around the fires felt unexpectedly warm. Daenerys listened to the easy banter of the Stark siblings, how Sansa gently teased Arya about her traveling gear, how Jon laughed quietly at their old jokes. It made her ache for what she'd never had: siblings, a large family to gather with on a cold night. Rhaegar's memory flitted through her mind. He had once yearned for his own illusions of family. She sensed that same longing in Jon's eyes when he was with his sisters, a tenderness he rarely showed. After the meal, Jon and Daenerys spoke with Sansa by torchlight near the riverbank. The moon reflected off the dark water. Sansa's face was half-shadowed as she gave them a diplomatic smile. "You'll find Winterfell changed, Your Grace. Since the army returned from the wars, we've been rebuilding. It's not the same as it once was, but it endures." Daenerys tucked a stray lock of silver hair behind her ear. "Winterfell is old and strong, like your family. I've seen how you command loyalty in your people. You and Jon have both done admirable work. I hope this visit shows them the crown means no harm and that your self-governance stands." Sansa nodded. "I trust Jon's judgment. He says you mean what you say, that we'll have more autonomy than we did under Targaryen kings of old or the Baratheon usurper. But the truth is, the North remembers. They remember the cost of bending the knee too freely." Daenerys accepted that without bristling. "We do not ask for blind fealty, only that we stand together so that the realm does not splinter into petty wars again." Jon placed a hand on his sister's arm. "I'll speak to the lords when we reach Winterfell. Let them see Daenerys for themselves. Maybe they'll stop whispering that she plans to burn them if they say the wrong word." Sansa rolled her eyes with a small laugh. "They'll grumble no matter what, but perhaps it'll help." They parted then, Sansa returning to check on details of the camp, Daenerys and Jon retreating to their own tent. Two Unsullied kept watch outside. Within, the tent was lit by a single lantern, and bedrolls were spread on the ground. Daenerys sat on a low stool, unlacing her boots, exhaustion evident in the slump of her shoulders. Jon crouched beside her, placing a gentle hand on her knee. "Cold?" he asked. She nodded. "A little." She felt more than the physical chill. The entire trip had reawakened the truth that while she was queen, she was still an outsider to these people. Perhaps they no longer saw her as a savage foreigner, but they did not view her as one of their own. She worried about winning them over without being oppressive. She also thought of the secret swirling between her and Jon. He had a blood claim to everything she had fought for. The prospect of announcing that truth to the Northern Lords was too volatile to contemplate. Jon picked up a fur and draped it around her shoulders. "We'll get a fire going." She caught his hand before he could rise. In the flickering lamplight, their gazes locked. "Jon," she said softly, "we've come so far together. We can't let fear or secrets destroy what we've built. You know that, don't you?" His expression shadowed with concern, but he nodded. "I do. I just wish the truth didn't threaten to undo everything." Her voice trembled with sincerity. "It won't. Not as long as we hold to each other. Whether you declare yourself the rightful heir or not, my claim means nothing if it tears the realm apart. I don't want a war with the North. If they found out you're Aegon Targaryen now." Jon leaned in, silencing her with a kiss. It was warm and chaste, but laden with feeling. When he pulled back, his tone was gentle. "I won't proclaim it. Not unless we must. I'm content to be Jon Snow to these people. The king in the North if they insist, but not your rival. Let's be thankful we've rid the realm of the undead and the worst tyrants. We have a chance at genuine peace." She rested her forehead against his. "Yes," she whispered. "Peace." They lingered like that, drawing comfort from each other's presence, the lamps glowed dancing on the canvas walls. The next morning, they broke camp and crossed the river at the Twins, continuing northward. Arya joined their party, riding near the front, occasionally glancing skyward at the dragons. Sansa and Bran traveled more slowly, flanked by a northern guard. It took several more days to traverse the increasingly cold roads, passing small villages that greeted Jon with cautious smiles. Many recognized him from the war effort against the undead. They gave Daenerys curious looks, muttering about the woman with silver hair whose dragons roamed the skies. But no one attempted hostility. Winter had hammered the region so harshly that any sign of relief was welcome, even if it came in the form of two massive winged beasts. Snow began to fall more frequently as they neared Winterfell. The nights grew frigid, the wind harsh. Daenerys bundled herself in furs but did not complain. She remembered the utter chill of standing atop the wall, the fierce bites of wind in the presence of the Night King's threat. This was merely winter. Once, in a moment of reflection, she glanced at her dragons perched on a hillside, their dark scales dusted with powdery flakes, and she realized that the creatures of fire and the land of ice need not be enemies. One afternoon, the gates of Winterfell appeared on the horizon. Smoke rose from its chimneys, and the walls looked sturdier than Daenerys recalled from the initial mustering before the war. Repairs had evidently been well managed under Sansa's oversight. A hush of anticipation fell on the travelers. For Jon, it was a homecoming. For Daenerys, it was a test. She felt a flutter of nerves in her stomach. She had stood in the Great Hall before, but now the war was over. What would the North truly think of her? They rode up to the main gates, the dragons sweeping overhead to land beyond the castle walls where open space allowed. Guards shouted the arrival of the king in the north and the queen of the Seven Kingdoms. The gates groaned open, revealing a courtyard where men and women stood arrayed, some in furs, some in black cloaks. Among them was Lyanna Mormont, young and fierce, still acting as head of Bear Island. Lord Glover was present too, along with a scattering of bannermen who had survived the war. Theon Greyjoy, newly returned from aiding Yara in the Iron Islands, had apparently chosen to come north as well. Daenerys spotted him near the back, stoic and subdued. Jon dismounted and beckoned Daenerys to follow. She slid from her saddle, squaring her shoulders against the chill wind. The hush in the courtyard was broken only by the crunch of feet on packed snow. Jon stepped forward. "My lords, I've returned," he announced, projecting his voice. "And I bring the queen who fought beside us against the dead Daenerys of House Targaryen." There was a pause, a moment thick with tension. Then Lyanna Mormont crossed her arms and spoke in her clear, firm voice. "We remember. She came with dragons. She lost men as we lost men. We owe her thanks." The pronouncement seemed to release a weight. Lord Glover gave a grudging nod, some of the bannermen murmured in agreement, and a measure of respect flickered in their eyes. Daenerys inclined her head graciously, stepping forward a pace. "I come not to demand fealty, but to see that Winterfell stands strong in the days to come. Our war against the dead cost us all dearly. Let us ensure the realm is never so vulnerable again." The onlookers nodded, uncertain but lacking open hostility. Sansa and Arya arrived soon after, guiding Bran's chair through the gates. Their presence further eased the crowd, who recognized the Starks as the anchors of northern tradition. With that, the group dispersed, returning to their duties while the main party entered the castle proper. Daenerys breathed a quiet sigh of relief, no applause, no sweeping bows, but neither were there curses or drawn swords. For the north, that counted as a polite reception. Inside, the great hall was warmed by fires in massive hearths. Servants bustled, preparing a modest feast to welcome Jon and Daenerys. The banners of House Stark hung from the rafters, a constant reminder of whose domain Winterfell truly was. Jon led Daenerys to the dais near the head of the hall, where Sansa took the high seat as Lady of Winterfell. Jon, as king in the north, had his seat beside her, though it was rarely used since he'd spent so long away. Arya positioned herself off to one side, near a pillar, arms folded, scanning the crowd with that hawk-like vigilance she never lost. Daenerys was offered a seat nearby. She declined any seat higher than Sansa's, mindful of the symbolism. Instead, she stood, letting Jon address the assembled lords. In his calm, steady voice, he explained that Daenerys had come to formalize the autonomy arrangement for the North, guaranteeing local governance under the broader umbrella of the Iron Throne. He made it clear she was not here to seize any lands or demand heavy taxes. Rather, they needed to coordinate trade routes, especially with winter still lingering, so that food could flow north and goods from the north could move south. Sansa added her own voice, emphasizing that Winterfell would not be overshadowed. Lord Glover asked pointedly, "And what of the old Targaryen tradition of punishing lords who defy them? Will that be reintroduced now that the Seven Kingdoms are united again?" Daenerys shook her head. "I have no desire to punish. My wish is to rebuild. Many lords in other regions have resisted me and remain alive under my rule. I punish those who refuse to surrender in open war, but the war is done." Murmurs of cautious acceptance rippled through the hall. Another lord brought up the question of the Vale's neutrality, and how the North might be forced to rely on southern roads for certain goods. Jon reassured them that the Vale's new Lady Regent, Robin Arryn's advisors actually, had opened new trade negotiations with the crown. Gradually, the lords saw that a Targaryen queen need not be an enemy, so long as Jon stood by to temper any extremes. By the time the short assembly ended, the air felt less fraught. That night, a modest feast took place. The fare was hardly lavish: rabbit stew, black bread, salted fish from White Harbor. But after the horrors of war, any communal gathering felt like a celebration. Daenerys found herself seated with Sansa, Arya, and Lyanna Mormont. Lyanna asked direct questions about the dragons' feeding habits, the battles in the south, and how Daenerys planned to keep them from scorching northern forests. Daenerys answered patiently, occasionally letting slip a faint smile at the girl's bluntness. Meanwhile, Jon shared toasts with some of the bannermen who had once doubted him. They spoke in hushed awe of how the Night King had nearly crushed them all. The name Rhaegar Targaryen surfaced once or twice. Some men recognized him from rumors of the battle at Eastwatch. Jon only spoke in generalities, calling him an ally returned by the Lord of Light, who gave his life again to save us all. No one pressed further. The details were too strange for most to dwell on. The night ended without conflict, and Daenerys retired to a comfortable chamber in the guest wing, far warmer than the drafty huts she had known while traveling. In the days that followed, Daenerys walked the grounds of Winterfell. She observed the repairs. New timbers in the outer walls, red-hatched roofs, stables expanded to accommodate the influx of men who had joined the final stand against the dead. She found the Godswood, with its ancient weirwood tree and the small pond that reflected red leaves. The hush there reminded her of why the North clung to the old ways. Once, she and Jon had spoken under a weirwood about secrets and burdens. Now, she stood alone, inhaling the crisp air, letting the old magic in the air prickle her skin. She was not alone long. Arya appeared from behind a trunk, silent as a shadow. Daenerys started, but Arya's expression was calm. "I didn't mean to disturb you," Arya said, though there was little apology in her tone. She joined Daenerys near the pool, gazing at the reflection of the red leaves. "You're thinking." Daenerys inclined her head. "Yes, this place is peaceful, mysterious. It feels sacred." Arya nodded. "I prayed here once before I left Winterfell as a girl. Wanted the old gods to help me be strong." She paused, glancing sidelong at Daenerys. "Jon cares for you deeply. I see it in his eyes. He once told me about your dragons, your fight against the dead. He said you were fearless. I wondered if that was truly so." Daenerys let out a breath. "I'm not fearless. I've just learned to move forward despite my fear." If I hesitated, I would have died a dozen times over in Essos alone. Arya studied her, that cool intensity reminiscent of a cat stalking a bird. I respect that. I also know people can speak pretty words and hide sharp blades in their sleeves. I hope, for Jon's sake, that your words and actions match. Daenerys held her gaze. I understand your concern. You love Jon, and you want to protect him. I have no intention of hurting him or betraying the North. I want to build something better. For a moment, Arya said nothing, her eyes unreadable. Then she inclined her head in a gesture of acceptance. That's good, because if you do plan any betrayal, or if I even think you do, I'll kill you myself. The words were spoken calmly, without bombast or malice, just a statement of fact. Before Daenerys could respond, Arya gave a small, almost apologetic smile. No offense, Your Grace. Enjoy your walk. Then she slipped away, leaving Daenerys alone beneath the crimson leaves. Daenerys exhaled, a mixture of tension and respect flitting through her. Arya Stark was not one to cower before queens or dragons. Yet the honesty of her threat gave Daenerys a strange sense of relief. At least she knew where Arya stood. She continued exploring Winterfell, mindful of the men and women who eyed her curiously. On the ramparts, she caught glimpses of northern huntsmen returning with boar and venison. In the crypts, she glimpsed ancient tombs, though she did not descend far. It felt too personal, the domain of Stark ancestors. She wondered if Ned Stark had ever imagined a Targaryen queen roaming these corridors in peace. As days turned into a fortnight, the initial flurry of her arrival settled into routine. Daenerys held small gatherings with local lords to discuss trade routes. Jon oversaw many of these meetings, but he also spent time reacquainting himself with Winterfell's people, hearing their concerns about wildling raids, though Tormund and the Free Folk had gone farther north, so that was minimal, and about bandits roving the King's Road. In the evenings, they dined in the Great Hall. Sansa's measured hospitality extended to everyone, though she often looked burdened, weighed down by the complexities of maintaining northern independence while also cooperating with the crown. One late afternoon, Daenerys observed the training yard from a high balcony. Below, men practiced archery, swords, and spears. At the far corner, Arya sparred with Brienne of Tarth, clashing wooden blades with startling speed. The watchers murmured in awe, both were skilled, but Arya's agility allowed her to slip under Brienne's towering presence. Daenerys leaned forward with fascination. She felt a brush of memory. In another time, she might have learned swordplay too, if only she'd had a teacher who believed in her. Instead, she had learned through blood and fire, forging a different path. Footsteps approached behind her. She turned to see Sansa. The Lady of Winterfell joined her at the railing, following Daenerys's gaze to the yard below. "They're remarkable, aren't they?" Sansa said softly. "Brienne swore an oath to protect me, and Arya fights like she's possessed by some unstoppable force." Daenerys nodded. "They remind me that not all battles are fought with armies in the field. Sometimes it's about individual skill or cunning. Your sister has both." Sansa studied Daenerys, her expression thoughtful. "She told me she spoke with you in the Godwood. Said you were honest. I appreciate that." Daenerys found Sansa's tone gentler than before. "I have no reason to deceive you," she said. "We want the same thing, a strong north, a strong realm." Sansa's gaze lingered on Arya. "Jon told me about how your father was the Mad King and how you've tried to break away from that legacy. I can't pretend we aren't wary, but I see how Jon looks at you, how he trusts you. And Arya, well, Arya rarely gives people the benefit of the doubt. If she believes you're sincere, that says something." Daenerys' heart lifted a fraction. This was as close to a genuine endorsement as she had heard from Sansa. "Thank you, Lady Stark." Sansa inhaled, bracing herself. "I know you two are close." Her cheeks colored slightly at the admission. "Jon is my brother, though not by blood, as I now know. But he is still my brother in heart, and I love him. He's wanted acceptance all his life. You've given him a chance to do something meaningful. For that, I'm grateful." Daenerys laid a hand lightly on Sansa's arm. "I only wish for him what he wants for himself, the chance to protect the North and help the realm heal. He's free to choose his own path." Sansa let out a quiet laugh. "Jon has always been stubborn. Sometimes that's a curse, but it's his greatest strength too." She looked to Daenerys, expression sober again. "The lords have started whispering about a possible union." Some even imagine you'll marry him, tying the north and the throne through vows. Is that rumor true? Daenerys's pulse kicked. She had known such talk would arise. The notion of a marriage between them was not foreign to Targaryen tradition, though that tradition often took far more disturbing shapes. But the North was not Essos, and Jon was not just any man. What might a wedding mean for him, for the realm, for the secret of his heritage? She chose her words carefully. Nothing has been decided. We've not made any announcements. But yes, we've grown close. If a marriage could help unify the realm, and if that's truly what Jon and I both want, then I wouldn't refuse. But it must be on our terms, not because the lords whisper for it. Sansa nodded slowly. I understand. Politics aside, marriage is personal. Though in Westeros it's never only that. Her eyes darted away as though recalling her own forced marriages and the horrors she had survived. For Jon's sake, I hope it's what you both truly want, not just what the realm demands. Daenerys squeezed her arm gently, sympathy in her eyes for the unspoken traumas. I promise, if it happens, it will be for the right reasons. They stood in companionable silence for a time, watching Arya and Brienne finish their spar. At last, Sansa excused herself to oversee dinner preparations, leaving Daenerys alone once again to her thoughts. That evening, after a simple meal of roast venison and root vegetables, Jon guided Daenerys through the corridors to a small sitting room seldom used. A fire crackled in the hearth. He offered her mulled wine from a pewter jug and poured some for himself. When they settled on a wooden bench near the fire, he took her free hand in his expression pensive. You've grown more comfortable here, he observed, lifting his cup to his lips. I remember how foreign Winterfell must have seemed at first. She sipped her wine, letting the warmth seep in. I do feel more at ease. Sansa has softened. Arya still watches me like a cat, but I think she's decided not to kill me. And the lords, well, they're not cheerful, but they don't sneer at the sight of me anymore. Jon brushed his thumb over her knuckles. They see you're not here to impose or burn them alive. That goes a long way in the north. A faint smile curved his lips, but it faded quickly. They also talk of marriage. It's not just rumor. Some have approached me privately, suggesting it would cement the alliance. She gazed into the fire, heartbeat fluttering. I had a similar conversation with Sansa today. She asked me directly if that was our intention. Jon studied her face. I never wanted to force you into something for political gain. You've seen me refuse a crown once already. I'd refuse a forced marriage, too, if it came to that. He swallowed hard. But what do you want? If we were free from the realm's demands, would you? Her chest tightened with emotion. She set her wine aside, turning to face him fully. I don't want to lose you, she said simply. We've shared too many battles, too many nights of doubt and hope. If the realm demands a union, let them. I'd be lying if I said the idea of marrying you didn't appeal. But I won't push you into it, not while your parentage remains secret. He nodded, understanding. If people knew I was Rhaegar's son, they'd expect me to be king above all. You'd be overshadowed by that. We could unravel everything we've built. He reached out, tucking a strand of her hair behind her ear. And yet, part of me wonders if we could unify the realm even more if we told the truth. The Targaryen line wouldn't be in question. No pretenders could arise. We'd stand together, stronger than ever. She closed her eyes, thinking of Rhaegar's short, tragic life, thinking of Aerys' shadow. It's too risky. Not yet. Too many have bled for this peace. Let them see us as we present ourselves. Jon Snow, king in the north, and Daenerys Targaryen, queen of the Seven Kingdoms. Equal partners, if not married, at least aligned. Maybe one day, we can find the courage to reveal your blood. He exhaled, pulling her into a gentle embrace. The crackle of the fire soothed them, and for a time, they let silence speak. Outside, a fresh snow began to fall, blanketing the ramparts. In that quiet, they found solace in each other's warmth, their foreheads resting together, hearts beating in tandem. Word soon spread through Winterfell and the nearby villages that the queen would remain for some weeks. She personally saw to it that the dragons had enough room to hunt, sending outriders to ensure local shepherds kept their flocks at a safe distance. Drogon and Rhaegar adapted surprisingly well to the colder climate, though they sometimes roost near the big fires outside Winterfell's walls to soak in the heat. Peasants gawked from afar but were less fearful now, for no tales circulated of vanished livestock or burned barns. One crisp morning, Daenerys, Jon, and a small escort ventured beyond Winterfell's walls on horseback. Rhaegar trailed overhead, watchful, while Drogon remained behind. Their goal was a cluster of farms that had petitioned Winterfell for relief. The harvest had been meager, and the families faced hunger. Daenerys wanted to see for herself. Jon accompanied her without question, though she could see concern in his eyes. The North's hunger was not new, and winter had a relentless grip. They rode through drifting snow, guided by a local huntsman named Dywyn. He led them to a few scattered homesteads nestled near a half-frozen stream. Smoke curled from the chimneys, and the sight of armed visitors put the farmers on edge. The presence of a green dragon circling overhead did not help. But Daenerys approached with a gentle manner, dismounting and bowing her head as she introduced herself. An older woman, face weathered by countless storms, recognized Jon. "You're Ned Stark's boy," she asked. Aid, voice quavering. "He visited once, many years ago. Promised to see us through the winter. He always kept his word." Jon smiled sadly. "I hope to do the same, Mistress Brynn." She eyed Daenerys, uncertain. "And you're the Targaryen queen, they say. The one with dragons?" Daenerys dipped her head. "I am. I'm here to see how we can help." "You've had a poor harvest?" The woman nodded, beckoning them to a small shed where a few sacks of barley and onions lay pitifully. "We thought we'd have more, but the ground froze early. The whites killed our neighbors and we've few hands to plow in spring. We'll starve before the new planting unless the snow melts soon." Daenerys laid a hand on the woman's shoulder. "We'll see that you don't starve," she said gently. She looked at Jon. "Winterfell's stores, can we spare enough for them and the other villages?" Jon's brow furrowed. "We have some surplus from the southern shipments. Sansa's done well rationing. It won't be plenty, but enough to tide them over, especially if winter ends soon." Daenerys considered. "We can dispatch a wagon train from Winterfell with grains. And once the roads are clear, ships from White Harbor can bring more. We'll see that your people don't go hungry." The old woman's eyes misted over with gratitude. She reached for Daenerys's hand, clasping it. "Thank you, your grace. I never thought I'd see a queen riding so far just to help the likes of us." Daenerys stroked the woman's knuckles. "A queen is only as strong as her people's faith. Rest assured we'll do what we can." They spent the rest of the day visiting neighboring farms, each with a similar story: reduced labor, meager stores, families lost to the undead or to the earlier battles. Through it all, Jon and Daenerys listened, took notes, and promised what aid Winterfell and the crown could spare. Rhaegar soared overhead like a silent guardian, occasionally landing on a distant knoll to watch. Children crept up to see him, wide-eyed, until their mothers dragged them back. As dusk neared, they made camp with their escort near a copse of pines. A small fire crackled, casting flickering light on the snow. Daenerys sat across from Jon, both wrapped in heavy furs. The day's events weighed on her, so many hungry families, so few resources. Even if the crown had more grain, distributing it to remote farms was no easy task. And with King's Landing still being rebuilt, she could not simply funnel all the realm's supplies north. She pressed a hand to her temple, feeling a headache forming. Jon rose from the log where he sat, moved around the fire, and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You're tired. Rest. I'll stand first watch." She looked up, managing a small smile. "Thank you. But I feel guilty sleeping while people starve." He knelt beside her, voice soft. "We'll fix what we can, Daenerys. We'll do it a bit at a time. You've seen worse in Essos when you freed the slaves. And you found solutions." She sighed, recalling the many nights she'd spent in Mirien's streets, listening to the pleas of freedmen with no place to go. "Those were different circumstances, but yes, we found a way. I hope we can here too." He reached for her hand. "Get some rest. In the morning, we'll head back to Winterfell and organize the supplies. Sansa can coordinate deliveries. Maybe we can ask the southern lords for additional help, though that might take time." She squeezed his hand in thanks, then pulled her furs closer and settled against a makeshift bedding. Jon took up his watch near a tree trunk, sword balanced across his knees, scanning the snowy darkness. Rhaegar's silhouette against the moonlit sky was a comforting sight, a reminder that not all her burdens were carried alone. They returned to Winterfell the next day with a renewed sense of purpose. Daenerys convened a small council with Sansa, Arya, and a few local stewards. They drafted a plan to send out wagons of grain to the neediest areas, prioritizing farmland that could recover quickly in spring. Jon advised them on which roads might be passable, which villages needed watchers for bandits, and so on. Over the coming weeks, shipments went out under guard, and the farmers who had despaired found reason to hope. That act of mercy did not go unnoticed. The northern lords, once suspicious, began to murmur more favorably about Daenerys. They saw her crossing the courtyard in plain clothes, speaking to blacksmiths about forging new plow blades or conferring with seamstresses about winter garments for children. The fabled Dragon Queen seemed less a distant conqueror and more a woman determined to help. Even Lyanna Mormont, always sharp-tongued, spoke approvingly, telling her men that the queen might be southern, but she's got fire in her belly for the right causes. As the weeks rolled into months, the snows began to recede ever so slightly. In the occasional midday sun, patches of brown earth emerged near Winterfell's walls. Sansa oversaw a plan to begin planting as soon as the ground thawed. Arya came and went, sometimes absent for days, returning with reports of outlaws or scouts from the Vale. Jon and Daenerys balanced their time between local governance and distant concerns, receiving ravens from King's Landing, where Tyrion reported progress and small challenges. None of it threatened the realm's stability, but it reminded them that their presence was missed. One evening, as the final holdouts of winter ice glimmered in the courtyard, Daenerys found herself alone in the old library. The shelves held battered tomes on northern genealogy, histories of the first men, treatises on weirwoods. Some had been lost when the castle was burned by Ramsay Bolton, but many remained. By the light of a single candle, Daenerys turned pages filled with swirling script. She paused on an illustration, an old depiction of the pact between the children of the forest and the first men. Small creatures with wide faces were drawn, offering carved weirwood branches to tall men in animal skins. The text spoke of forging peace through mutual need. She let her mind wander. The Targaryens were once conquerors, but perhaps now was the time for pacts and alliances built on trust, not fear. She touched the page lightly, then closed the book, slipping it back onto the shelf. Jon appeared in the doorway, a contemplative look on his face. "I've been looking for you," he said quietly. "Sansa said you came here." She nodded, crossing to him, the candle's glow flickering across their features. "Just reading old histories. Thinking about how the realm has come full circle from ancient agreements to modern ones, and how our own alliance might shape the future." He gently took the candle from her, setting it aside, then drew her into a soft embrace. She felt the warmth of his body against hers, felt the weariness of the day melt away. For a moment, she let herself rest her head on his shoulder. The future was uncertain, but here, in the quiet library of Winterfell, she felt safe. Jon spoke softly into her hair. "Tormund sent a raven. He says the free folk are doing well beyond the wall, but they wonder if there's a place for them in the realm now that the threat is gone. Some might like to settle in the gift, closer to farmland. We'll have to figure that out too." She smiled wryly. "Always another challenge." He let out a small chuckle. "Yes, but we'll face it as we have all the others together." She looked up at him, a gentle intensity in her eyes. "Jon Snow, I once told you I wanted to break the wheel. Sometimes I think we're merely reinventing it. But maybe that's enough if it means a better life for all these people." He stroked a thumb across her cheek. "It's more than enough. You've done so much good. And you'll do more." He paused, swallowing. "You asked me once if I'd ever want to claim my birthright. The answer's still no, not if it sets the realm against itself. But if one day the realm can bear it, if we stand together, maybe it could be a blessing, not a curse." She nodded, tears pricking the corners of her eyes. "One day. When we're ready." Her voice caught. "You know, you're the only family I have left, in truth. And I'm more glad for it than you can imagine." He kissed her then, softly, in the hush of the library. The candle guttered, casting dancing shadows on the stone walls. The moment felt private, timeless, a quiet oath to keep building a future that would not devour them as war had devoured so many others. Morning came with a pale sun that glinted on patches of melting snow. Word spread of a feast in Winterfell's courtyard that evening to celebrate the turning of the season, a small festivity that signaled the North's hope for the spring. Trestle tables were arranged, covered with freshly baked bread, salted cod, venison pies. Musicians tuned their fiddles. Children ran around squealing, ignoring the slush beneath their boots. Daenerys donned a simple white cloak trimmed with gray fur and walked among the revelers. The North might be reserved, but they understood the relief of winter's waning. People joked about the unstoppable queen of dragons shivering less now that the sun had grown warmer. They hoisted mugs of ale, offered her slices of pie. She tasted them with a gracious nod, trying not to show how foreign all of this still felt. She was used to grand feasts in Meereen with exotic spices or the hush of King's Landing courts. This was different, raw, honest, full of the North's hearty spirit. She spotted Jon speaking with Glover and Lyanna Mormont, the latter prodding him about some detail of supply distribution. Sansa chatted with a group of women from nearby villages, discussing weaving patterns. Arya was nowhere to be seen, likely vanished to some vantage point. Bran sat near a table, watched over by a servant, his eyes distant as if in a trance. Daenerys caught his gaze for a moment, and she felt a faint shiver. He seemed to see right through her. Then he blinked, returning to the present with a soft smile. The evening wore on. The bonfire in the courtyard crackled high, shedding warmth. Music floated across the air, and a few couples danced in the open space, though the footing was slick with patches of snow. Daenerys lingered on the sidelines, content to observe. Then Jon approached, hand outstretched. "Would you care to dance?" he asked, a playful glint in his eyes. She arched an eyebrow. "Do the Northerners even dance? I've seen them fight, drink, brood, but rarely dance." He chuckled. "We do, badly sometimes, but we do. Come on. They're playing a slow reel. Even a dragon queen can manage that, yes?" She set her cup aside and took his hand. He led her into the circle of revelers. The music was a simple melody backed by a drum that beat a steady rhythm. Around them, couples or small groups stepped in time, boots squeaking. Daenerys let Jon guide her, though she was hardly skilled in northern reels. She stumbled once and he caught her waist, chuckling under his breath. She felt a flush of warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. As they turned, she caught glimpses of onlookers smiling. Some northern men raised their mugs in approval. The sight of their king dancing with the Targaryen queen in the flickering firelight seemed to enchant them. Even Sansa watched with a subtle, almost affectionate grin. Daenerys realized this moment might do more for unity than all the councils and taxes in the realm. The queen was here, one of them, laughing, dancing. She felt tears threaten to rise, tears of relief and a tender sort of happiness. The reel ended, but Jon didn't let go of her hand. The night had grown late, the sky a canopy of stars above Winterfell's torches. They left the dance circle, breathless, and found a quiet corner near the courtyard's edge. From there, Daenerys could see the wide plains beyond the walls, patches of moonlight reflecting on melting snow. She heard the soft hum of distant conversation, the fading notes of fiddles, the crackle of the bonfire. Jon stepped closer, voice low in her ear. "You're different here than you were in Meereen or even King's Landing. It suits you." She tilted her head, studying him under the moon's glow. "I could say the same for you. You were restless in King's Landing, always worried about the next threat. Here, you have a certain calm about you." He shrugged. "It's home. As much as I've roamed, Winterfell is the only place that ever felt truly mine." His eyes shone with an earnest light. "But you're part of that now. Wherever we go, you carry a piece of home with you." Daenerys' breath caught. The sincerity of his words tightened her chest with emotion. She reached up, brushing her fingertips along his cheek. "You're the first person who ever made me feel that way, safe, accepted. I never thought I'd find it in Westeros. But here we are." Jon's lips curved into a warm smile. For a moment, it seemed he might say something profound, but then he simply leaned in and kissed her softly. The hush of the courtyard enveloped them, the revelers distant. When they parted, her cheeks were flushed and a flutter of joy coursed through her, tempered by the knowledge that the world was complicated. Yet for tonight, at least, they could share this calm. The days of near spring wore on, bringing renewed hope. Snowmelt trickled into streams, fields turned muddy, and the air, while still cold, lost its biting edge. Daenerys and Jon oversaw the distribution of seeds and tools. Sansa managed the castle with efficiency, granting audiences to local folk who needed direction. Arya continued her comings and goings, occasionally taking travelers' roads to confirm that bandits were chased off. Life seemed to settle into a welcome routine that Daenerys found oddly comforting. Then a raven arrived from King's Landing. Tyrion's words were polite but urgent. Tensions in the Vale threatened to flare, and he recommended Daenerys return soon to quell rumors that the Queen had abandoned her throne. Some in the Vale worried that with the Queen absent, lords loyal to the old regime might plan a coup. The letter ended with a polite request that both Daenerys and Jon make an appearance to reassure the southern lords. Tyrion also mentioned that the Iron Bank was pressing for certain payments, a matter best handled by the crown in person. Daenerys read the message by lamplight in the privacy of Jon's solar. She handed it to him afterward, watching his expression darken. "It appears our time here is drawing to a close," she said softly. "We always knew we'd have to return eventually." Jon sighed, setting the parchment aside. "We've done what we can in the north for now." Sansa can handle day-to-day affairs. But yes, the realm calls. A faint sadness crept into his eyes. I'll miss this place. She reached for his hand. Then let's not be strangers. The lines of travel will remain open. We'll come back often, or at least as often as duty allows. She paused. And the lords here, do you think they're comfortable enough with me that they won't rise in rebellion the moment we leave? He shook his head, though a smile played at his lips. They've grown used to you. I think the memory of your kindness and your dragons overhead will keep them in check. And Sansa, Arya, Bran, they'll stand for you if anyone stirs trouble. She nodded in relief. Then let's prepare to depart in a few days. We can gather the retinue, make sure the roads are safe. I'll let Drogon and Rhaegar hunt before we go so they aren't restless on the journey. Jon agreed. We'll have a final meeting with the northern lords to confirm the next steps. Then we'll head south. And so it was arranged. Daenerys spent her last few days in Winterfell ensuring the newly planted fields had all the supplies needed, encouraging the stewards to keep distributing grain as promised. The winter storms had abated, but in the north, storms could return quickly. Nevertheless, the farmers expressed hope that the coming season might finally bring a decent harvest. On the day of departure, the courtyard filled with men and horses once again. Daenerys, Jon, and their small retinue mounted up while Drogon and Rhaegar circled overhead. Sansa and Arya were there to see them off. Sansa gave Jon a warm embrace. I'll keep the place running, she promised. Come back soon or I'll have to track you down. Arya smirked and clasped forearms with Jon in a warrior's greeting. Try not to get yourself killed again, she teased. I'm running out of time to keep saving you. He smiled thinly. I'll do my best. He turned to Arya more seriously. Watch over Sansa and Bran. The realm might be calmer now, but keep your blades sharp. Arya flashed her dagger with a grin. Always. They turned to Daenerys. Sansa inclined her head. Thank you for all you did here. You've won over more of the north than I ever thought possible. Daenerys bowed slightly in return. I only hope to do more good. Until we meet again. Arya's grin faded into a solemn nod. Safe travels, your grace. With that, Daenerys mounted her horse, Jon at her side. The gates opened and they rode out, the dragons soaring above. As the walls of Winterfell shrank behind them, Daenerys felt a pang of longing. She had found a measure of peace here, something almost like a home. But duty called them south, back to the seat of power, back to the city where politics never slept. Their journey along the King's Road was smoother now that spring stirred. The ground had firmed, streams ran high with meltwater, and the air smelled faintly of thawing earth. Villages they passed seemed in better spirits, the shock of war was fading, replaced by cautious optimism. Some recognized the queen and king traveling together and offered them bread or fresh milk as tokens of gratitude. Jon noted quietly that this shift in mood was due, in large part, to Daenerys' efforts. Before, they feared the Targaryen name. Now, they see you aren't a monster. She squeezed his hand on the reins. It's all I ever wanted. To prove I wasn't my father's daughter in cruelty. If I am known for mercy and strength, that is enough. A week into the journey, they approached Moat Cailin, the ancient ruin that guarded the northern border of the Neck. There, they parted ways with some of the northern guards, who returned to Winterfell. The retinue pressed on south, passing swampy ground where frogs croaked in the twilight. Daenerys found it fascinating how quickly the geography changed from the stark snows to damp bogs, then to rolling hills. At the Crossroads Inn, they paused for rest. The inn was bustling with travelers, merchants from the Vale, knights headed to Riverrun, a few sellswords in battered armor. Rhaegar and Drogon perched outside, drawing stares but no panic. Inside, Daenerys and Jon took a small private table near the hearth, sharing a simple meal of stew and bread. Their presence caused a ripple of excitement among the patrons, but no one dared disturb them. It felt strangely normal, almost like a pair of common travelers, if one ignored the dragons outside. Jon broke bread, handing her a portion. Tomorrow we'll reach Harrenhal or pass by it, then on to King's Landing in a few more days. Tyrion's letters said everything is stable, but the lords will want to see you. Daenerys nodded. I have to finalize the matter of Highgarden, and the Vale, and the Iron Islands. So many pieces. Her voice held a note of weariness but also resolve. We'll handle it one step at a time. He studied her face. I know it's not the life you imagined. Did you ever think, back in Essos, that your greatest challenge would be farmland disputes and forging alliances? She smiled faintly, remembering the scorching Sioux. Of the Red Waste, the humiliations in Karth, the triumphant liberation of Meereen. If someone had told me then that I'd be dancing in the snow at Winterfell, I'd have laughed. But here I am. He reached across the table, entwining his fingers with hers. Here we are, he echoed softly. They continued south. The land grew greener, the air warmer. By the time they reached the outskirts of King's Landing, spring felt palpable. Buds on trees, patches of wildflowers emerging. Tyrion had sent riders to watch for their arrival, so a small escort of city watch welcomed them near the Rosby Road. Jon and Daenerys could see the city's outline in the distance, the Red Keep standing over the bay like a sentinel. Memories flooded back. The tension of the final siege, the flash of wildfire. Now, a calmer city awaited, though doubtless it had new problems. Rhaegar and Drogon flew overhead, announcing the Queen's return with a thunderous roar that echoed across farmland. As they entered through the gates, Daenerys saw signs of continued rebuilding. Scaffolds along the walls, fresh mortar glistening where cracks had been. The city watch saluted, and crowds gathered to gawk. Some cheered the return of the Queen, others simply stared. The feeling in the air was a mixture of curiosity and relief. Apparently nothing too dreadful had befallen them in her absence. Tyrion stood in the courtyard of the Red Keep, arms folded over his chest, a relieved grin on his face. Grey Worm stood beside him, stoic as ever. Daenerys dismounted, and Tyrion stepped forward. "Your Grace, welcome back," he said, offering a slight bow. "You too, your King in the North, should I still call you?" Jon gave a mild shrug. "Jon will suffice." Tyrion gestured. "I trust your trip north was productive?" Daenerys inclined her head. "Yes, they're rebuilding. The worst of winter has passed." "How is the capital?" He grimaced slightly. "Stable enough, though the Vale is rattling its sword about independence. We can discuss it in council. Also, the Iron Bank expects an audience with you soon regarding the Crown's debts. I've managed to keep them pacified so far." She sighed inwardly but summoned a determined smile. "Very well. Let's not keep them waiting too long." She glanced at Jon. "Shall we?" He smiled back. "Let's." They strode into the Red Keep together, passing the hallways where the ghosts of the recent war still lurked in memory. Servants hurried about, bowing at Daenerys' approach, though none seemed fearful. Tyrion chattered about minor issues. Grain tariffs, a rumored plague in the Westerlands that might or might not be real, shipments from Dorne. Through it all, Daenerys mentally prepared herself. The quiet respite of the North was over. Now came the demands of the Iron Throne, the dance of lords and gold. Yet she did not face it alone. Jon walked at her side, a living testament to the realm's fragile unity. He might hold a secret that could shatter everything. She might be a queen whose father's name still haunted corridors. But together, they had staved off winter's darkest threat, bridged the chasm between north and south, and laid the groundwork for a realm that need not cower under the lash of tyranny. The tasks ahead were formidable, but so were they. As they entered the throne room, with the distant clang of armor and murmur of courtiers, Daenerys lifted her head high, resolved to rule with the mercy and strength she had always vowed to uphold. The Iron Throne stood at the far end of the hall, silent, ancient, formed of swords melted by dragonfire generations ago. Daenerys had once found it intimidating. Now she approached it with measured steps. Jon remained by her side, just a pace behind, neither overshadowing her nor diminishing himself. The Queen and the King, who was known as Snow, but who bore within him the blood of Targaryens, had returned to shape the next chapter of Westeros. And for the moment, at least, hope flickered as surely as the torches on the walls, a fragile flame that neither ice nor iron had managed to extinguish. Though many challenges lay in wait, further negotiations, rebellious lords, debts owed, and the question of how to preserve a lasting peace, Daenerys allowed herself a single breath of gratitude. They had come so far from the night the dead marched beyond the wall. They had kindled alliances in the face of despair, bridging impossible gaps. Rhaegar's resurrection and second death, the heartbreak and sacrifice, had all led here. In that swirling tapestry of fate, she and Jon stood as living proof that the horrors of the past need not define the future. The wheel might yet be broken if only they continued to choose compassion over fear. So Daenerys ascended the steps to the Iron Throne, her heart steady, her spirit unbowed, Jon's presence lending a quiet reassurance. The courtiers bowed in a ripple of motion. Tyrion took his place as Hand, Grey Worm as loyal protector. Outside, the dragons roared once more, echoing across the city's rooftops, an exultant reminder that the reign of House Targaryen was not done, but reborn, tempered by the lessons of ice and fire. And beyond the city walls, spring slowly crept across the land, a promise of renewal after the long winter's night. If they could hold fast to what they had built, Westeros might truly see a dawn free from the old cruelties, guided instead by a queen and a king who had chosen unity over conquest and love over fear.